Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1992 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Emma Thompson won for her performance in Howard's End. But why did she beat fellow nominees Catherine Deneuve, Mary McDonnell, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Susan Sarandon? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 65th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1992. We'll be discussing how Emma Thompson won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is an actor, a writer, a podcaster. She's done film, TV, and theater, and she's the co-host of FYI, the Murphy Brown podcast. Welcome to the show for the first time, Lauren Milberger.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to also, just have on an actor to talk about acting, because that's something I don't always do.
One of my absolute favorite thing is to nerd out about acting, so I'm glad to provide that service.
Yes, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about it. So before we talk 1992, Lauren, let's just talk Best Actors as a category.
Yes.
So as always, first question for you. Who would you say is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
This was very hard for me. But I'm a huge fan of Shirley MacLaine, and I feel like that maybe that's an easy answer, although I feel like people aren't talking about her as much as they did. And I'm too young to have been excited at the time for Shirley MacLaine, but I really do love her performance in terms of endearment, to the point of which I kind of get, this is terrible, I get a little bored by everybody else as much as I love the movie. She's so dynamic in it, and it also sort of feels like a bit of I hate the term, what is it, right? That you're getting it for your whole career, right? Because it's not like she's not amazing.
Like a legacy win.
A legacy
right.
win, like an Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman, right?
Right, from this year.
Yeah. But it feels like that, even though she absolutely deserves it for this movie. And I feel like Terms of Endearment would have gotten forgotten, to be honest. I mean, there is the chemistry between her and Nicholson, which is just absolutely incredible. But it makes the film, and I feel like it could have become this sort of melodramatic, forgettable film that people don't really know about in sort of the Oscar canon because of her performance. And The Apartment is one of my favorite films of all time, because what I love about, and we'll talk about that with Emma, is that I like actors who have a sense of humor. I've always been drawn to comedy, because comedy is, to use this terrible term, they used to call it the redheaded stepchild, that sort of terrible term, right? This idea of like, oh, well, it's really easy to do comedy. It's not sort of respected. And I don't think that it is easy, not to mention that life is filled with comedy and drama. We laugh at the sad parts. We cry at the happy parts. It's not as cut and dry. And so to see an actor who I feel is able to encompass comedy and drama into one thing, which she does do in this movie as well, it's really sort of a beautiful performance. But I think it's more because I really love what Shirley MacLaine has brought to the canon. And also, as an actor myself, she is one of the rare actors who has really gone from ingenue to middle-aged to old lady.
Yeah.
It's really incredible.
And she is still working. I truly do respect Shirley MacLaine, and that is an excellent answer. She definitely got my win. I think the Academy got that one right in 83, despite Deborah Winger, I think, turning in an equally great performance in that movie. But Shirley MacLaine, I think, is on another level. And once again, I always go back to her excellently timed Oscar speech saying, "I deserve this, thank you." And I'm like, you know what? She's right. She gets to say that.
She kind of does. I mean,
yeah.
And her story.
Not everyone does.
Yeah. I mean, I know this isn't about people's stories, right? But like the story of just like being an understudy and, you know, going, you kid, I'm going to put you in this film. It's ridiculous that is not some Schwab's drugstore lie, right? That it's the truth.
Yeah.
So that's my choice for my favorite. But I think it'll change, right? I'm sure like next week I'll look at it on the list and go, oh, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, there's 95 years to choose from. So,
yes, exactly.
Great. Well, on the flip side, there are many actresses who have lost, many more actually, actresses who have lost Oscars than one over the years. So who would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in this category?
This was really hard also, but much easier. And I think I already knew off the top of my head before I like double checked. And I think this is such a hard, I've listened to people answer this question, right? And I think it's hard because you don't want to say, oh, well, that person who won wasn't deserving, you know?
Right.
But I gravitate towards Whoopi Goldberg in The Color Purple. It's such an amazing performance, particularly considering how much she was known for doing comedy at the time. It's a emotional performance. And, you know, going back to the idea of legacy, Geraldine Page is an icon of the theater, an icon of film. I understand why they wanted to give it to her. And, you know, I haven't seen Trip to Bountiful since I was a small child, and it was not for me because it's an adult film. It's, you know, I watched a lot of adult films, but there's certain films you're just like, yeah, it's just an old lady on a bus. And one of my acting teachers from grad school is in it. I mean, I would love to revisit it, and I bet I would have a different feeling about it. Now, many people have won Oscars for movies that are not good. Trip to Bountiful is also, I know, is a lovely film. It just, I can't give you a thought on it because it will be a child's thought, and that is unfair. But it does feel like they gave it to her because she's Geraldine Page.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. And again, she won in supporting. But listen, and I appreciate, as someone who loves comedy, as I mentioned, to see someone win for a wonderful comedic performance.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's controversial, but I do wish that they would have a comedy category, not because it's less of, but just because
I've thought about that too.
We can't get anyone to respect it. And it's just really unfair. And if that's the way it's going to be, then just be like the Globes, I feel. Like, just have a comedy category. But, you know, that could also be fraught with what is comedy.
Yeah, that is what I was going to say. It's like, you know, obviously I've talked about Whoopi. She is one of my all-time in this category of nominated performances. So the fact that she did not win for it, especially when it's the debut, is just mind-blowing. But
I used to watch that movie on cable all the time. Yeah. And then back to back probably with Jumping Jack Flash. So to see those two performances,
the range.
It's ridiculous.
Yes. Excellent. Well, now let us get into what we're here to talk about today, which is 1992 Best Actress. So 65th Academy Awards, the nominees were Catherine Deneuve in Indochine, Mary McDonnell in Passion Fish, Michelle Pfeiffer in Love Field, Susan Sarandon in Lorenzo's Oil, and Emma Thompson in Howard's End, with the winner being the great Emma Thompson. So before we break down these individually, did you have any overall thoughts just from watching this lineup?
It's interesting because this is around the time that I can first remember being very into the Oscars. Like, to the point of which I started scrapbooking for Best Actress and Best Supporting. It didn't last long. It was more just like, oh, here are lovely pictures of each person from the category who won. But I would pull out the Premiere magazine, used to have like this gorgeous fold out. I mean, the graphics were beautiful. I would put it on the back of my door in my bedroom, and then, you know, watch the awards and like click, you know, tick everything off. Like, I was this is like, I love it, when I got so super into it. So except for Indochine, I had already seen all these films. So it was really interesting to go back and see films that I have not seen since I was a kid, and not even just see them through a different light, which we'll talk about, but also just to see how different the Oscars were back then, in a way that I think I don't realize, that it feels very much like what you would think films would be 20 years before. and I don't just mean in sort of the filmmaking, which when we go in the individual films, I would love to talk about, but it felt very lackluster to me when at first I was like, oh, I get to watch Michelle Pfeiffer. Oh, Susan Sarandon. I remember loving Lorenzo's Oil. And not that I didn't sob my eyes out at Lorenzo's Oil.
Sure.
I'm not an unfeeling person. But it just felt very sort of obvious in retrospect who was going to win. That would be my takeaway.
Yeah. No, I definitely came away with similar feelings. This year is known, at least in my kind of circles, for not being a super memorable Best Actress lineup. We did have a frontrunner who sailed right through to her win, so there probably wasn't too much suspense going into it, but I think her performance and her film have definitely held up nicely in the decades since. The competition she has here is a little on the weaker side overall, which is not to say I don't like all of these other actresses and some of these performances
actors,
too.
Yeah.
But I don't think even at the time, because I wasn't fully there, watching it, that there was a lot of excitement of what we got in Best Actress here. But, having said that, definitely eager to break down a lot of these because they are so underseen, I think, nowadays. Obviously happy that an icon like Catherine Deneuve got her nomination here after decades and decades.
And she's
Susan
stunning.
Sarandon.
Yeah.
Oh,
stunning
she's
on
incredible.
camera.
Yeah. Susan Sarandon in this period of her career is like red hot. We have Mary McDonnell, who's become more of a TV star nowadays, but had this great leading role here. Michelle Pfeiffer, she had a great year. Would love to talk about Batman Returns, but that's not what they nominated. But
here's my question for you. Do you think, because at the time I would not have been as immersed in the Oscar gossip as I became in 93 when I got a little older and sort of started to understand and, enter every video store contest to win free stuff, make it a strategy. Because everyone would go with who they wanted to vote for. I would go with the experts, and I would always win. But I digress. Do you think that this is their way of giving her sort of her laurels for the year that she had, or is it more just like, we love Michelle Pfeiffer, feels like an Oscar-winning performance because of what the subject matter is?
I mean, I would guess probably the latter, but I do think just her having a great year is always going to help. It's never going to hurt,
Because it was just interesting because I am one of the people who absolutely adore her as Catwoman, and
of course,
it was a performance that changed my life.
And
I love Grease too, so that says a lot.
Oh, there you go.
Right? So I was already a fan, but I had not realized it was the same year until preparing for this podcast.
I know, right?
It really blew my mind. It was like, oh, wow, okay. But I also thought I was going to really love Love Field, and wow, is it dated.
And here we are, right?
Yes. So
we'll get to it.
Yeah, like, oh, that's right. It's 92. Oh, I'm sorry. My memory is completely off from this film. Yeah.
Well, regardless, happy to have you here to help me explore these, and especially to dig into Emma's big win.
Yes.
And who we think could have been a runner-up here, because again, she kind of dominated the whole season. So we will get to that at the very end. But shall we get right into exploring these performances? All right. Well, we're starting off with Catherine Deneuve in Indochine. So we're starting with a true icon of French cinema, the great Catherine Deneuve, and her one and only Oscar nomination here for
Which is
Indochine.
Insane.
Yes, more of a blight on the Oscars than on her. But usually with non-English language actresses I've talked about on the show before, it's like younger or newer kinds of actresses breaking out internationally, like Melina Mercouri or Anouk Aimée, Isabella Gianni, even like Sophia Loren to some degree, all of them getting nominations in what feels like the right time in their careers. But with Catherine Deneuve, she's already been this well-established star of French and international cinema for decades and decades before this nomination happens. Very similar situation down the line, actually, when we get to talk about Isabelle Huppert. Catherine Deneuve, her work dates all the way back to the 50s, starting when she was very young, and her breakthrough came with the great Jacques Demy film, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and she went on to star in multiple iconic films through the 60s, Repulsion, Belle de Jour, The Young Girls of Rochefort, and she was very well known for her beauty, her elegance, her coolness. She's also modeling. She became the face of Chanel No. 5, which really gave her a major boost in recognition. Her partnership with Yves Saint Laurent, wearing his designs in a lot of her films. She's winning multiple César Awards. And she's got some interesting stuff in the 80s leading up to this, like The Hunger. So then finally, when Indochine comes around, she's basically a veteran and one of the more well-known and respected French actresses in the world. And Oscar voters finally are taking this opportunity to nominate her, even if only this once. So to talk about Indochine, big, sweeping French epic, very much in the vein of like David Lean's films or things that the Oscars loved, like Out of Africa and The English Patient, that kind of thing, where it tells this large-scale story of Eliane, played by Catherine Deneuve. She's a French rubber plantation owner in colonial Indochina in the 30s. She has an adopted daughter, Camille, a Vietnamese teenage girl whose parents died. There's also this dashing French Navy lieutenant named Jean-Baptiste who has a fling with Eliane, but then he saves Camille from an attack, which causes her to fall in love with him. Complications from there. So when Eliane finds out about it, she has him transferred, only to have Camille leave home to chase after him, and it becomes this big affair when Eliane hopes for Camille's return. So this is a pretty interesting one to start with, and this is a film that seems to divide people who watch it nowadays, but curious on your thoughts for Catherine Deneuve and this performance.
She's lovely, and I don't mean just for beauty. I just mean that she has this maturity, this depth to her whenever she's on screen. The film made me extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And in so many different ways. And it was interesting because as I got like sort of halfway through it, I was like, oh, well, first, it's so French.
Aggressively French.
Very, very French. In just the plot and the affairs and, sort of the love and so forth. And I kept thinking it was a novel. It's not a novel, right? I didn't seem to be able to find...
It feels like a novel.
Feels like a novel.
It's original. Yeah.
And my thought was, oh, this is They're Gone with the Wind. And then I found out that that's what Roger Ebert said. And I thought, okay, so I'm getting the correct vibe from this, because I was sort of wondering, I didn't watch a lot of foreign films in this time period at the time for a couple of reasons, because of my age, but also I'm dyslexic. And so as a young person, who is figuring this out, reading in a film was probably not now I love foreign films, don't get me wrong. But like as a child, it was not something that I would like go after as much as I would go after all kinds of, I saw Passion Fish because it was nominated, right? Like I was really into, I had to see all of these films. So that's probably why, I didn't. So at first I was like, am I not really sort of getting what was happening in French cinema at the time? But it's uncomfortable in the sense of the story that it's telling from, I think, a modern perspective, but also from small things like, I guess the French at the time saw as sexy is she keeps asking him not to have sex with her in the back of a car. And she's finally just like lets him, but also asks her driver to stand in the rain.
Yeah.
I had to pause and take a break. I was so angry for her to ask him to stand in the rain. It's just, and so I didn't know what the point of view was. I wasn't sure if the point of view was, this is a sweeping time, the way that Gone with the Wind says, isn't it beautiful? And you're like, no, really, it's not. It's terrible. Or it's making a social commentary on colonialism and imperialism at the time, right? And I don't think it has a point of view. And so that also makes me uncomfortable because I appreciate characters that are complex, right? That aren't perfect people, that, she's kind in one way, but also like beats a guy for deserting, right? Like that's a human, real person. But he burns a ship of these poor migrant workers and then feels guilty. Like
then she's like, it's okay. Like he's an opium kind of farmer.
Yeah,
but kind of like waves it off.
I get what it was trying to do back then, and I find it interesting how lauded it was. Like I know other magazines and newspapers who called it one of the best films, if not the best foreign film of the year. But it does not hold up. It's beautiful to look at. The costumes are gorgeous. She's doing her best, but I don't know what the point of view is, and therefore makes me uncomfortable. And then, the sort of, soap opera. The young girl gets pregnant. It would be interesting if someone tried to remake this. I don't think they will, but I think that in the political climate today, I think it might be actually interesting to remake this, but I don't think they will, or should they? But it was really hard to get through, I have to be honest.
So did you feel like that kind of affected your thoughts on her performance?
It did. It really affected my performance. And it's always hard when it's not a language that you speak. I hate to say it. I'm trying to be delicate, right? Like, I don't want to be obnoxious about this and say, oh, it was a boring film, I didn't like it. But she's lovely to watch. It doesn't matter what she's in. And I think that this film at the time, probably more because of the subject matter, I'm guessing, made people feel they had to say, look at this amazing feat. We need to give Catherine Deneuve her laurels because for some reason we haven't. And it does feel almost like a bit of a legacy. But also, she's not terrible in it. She's just being Catherine Deneuve. She's a wonderful actress. You know, you just kind of want to be like, well, I wish you'd given it to her for, something in the 60s.
Yeah.
So I can't... Listen, I think that's this category in general. If you just put a list of all of these actors, right, and you didn't put the films that they were in, you would go stellar list, fantastic list, prime women of 1992. Absolutely. Yeah. It's when you put the list of films that you go, interesting.
But for that... Okay.
Yeah, so it's not like they're terrible in it. It's just,
Sure.
It doesn't live up to their talent, I think.
Yeah. Well, for me, I mean, Catherine Deneuve was one of those early actresses when I was really exploring beyond Hollywood and really getting into more international cinema. All that early work that I mentioned, especially Umbrellas of Cherbourg and Repulsion. I was really just taken by just how striking her screen presence was. She has a face and a magnetism that's just made for film, and it's hard to not imagine, like it's not hard to imagine why all these auteur directors would be so taken with her and want to make her kind of like their muse. So I will admit I haven't followed her a lot in her later work in that middle age period of her career, so I didn't entirely know what to expect with this. I think she's turning in a good solid performance here. I don't think it's extraordinary. I don't think it's especially even calling for a nomination, at least in the traditional sense of what we expect to be nominated for Oscars. But I do think she does have a presence that I still respond to, and she brings this kind of dignity and some nuance to what I kind of think is a thin role. I wasn't a big fan of the movie, to be honest. I find it to be one of those very handsomely mounted films that ultimately don't say much of substance or really provoke any strong emotion in me one way or the other. And I also just think the decision to focus on Catherine Deneuve's character is not a very successful decision, because I do think the more interesting story, and what would probably be the story in a modern age, is her daughter and the journey that she goes on as she's kind of like coming into her own, right?
Yeah, which shows also why the point of view feels in a modern age a bit, and I don't want to necessarily say sloppy per se, but it feels so off, because you're like, so you're doing it from the white woman's point of view. So is that the character I'm supposed to empathize with? Are you telling me that colonialism is bad, or is it just that she went through these dramatic moments and had to leave because politics changed? It just, the fact that her daughter just sort of kind of leaves the narrative, right? And then is like, I'm going to stay here. And you're like, well, what happened with you? Like, what's going on? And then I know that when people tell stories to someone as a device, right? Like, they're probably not really telling them everything. We're just seeing it from their point of view. But like his grandmother is telling him about all the sex that she had. Like, I was hoping to really enjoy it, but it was very, very dated to me, and is unfortunate. This is her only nomination. Gorgeous costumes. Great gowns, beautiful gowns.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful gowns. There it is. I messed up the quote.
I think for her performance, though, it's like, in the beginning, I'm like, okay, let's do this. She's introduced coming in on the boat, and she's got that incredible sort of black costume with the veil and everything, sweeping orchestra underneath, kind of romantic, epic feel. And she's Catherine Deneuve, so she's this great beauty, but also very regal. And she kind of is like oozing this richness and privilege. Like she's kind of like breathing this rarefied air her almost. And I think she, as an actress, does just carry herself and her posture with so much poise and class. And I think the other part of it is like the power that she likes to wield over people because of her position.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of chilling quality to when we see her at one point beating one of her workers.
That was what I was like. I understand that not all characters are perfect, right? No one wants a perfect character, but there's no commentary on that, right? Like we're supposed to, I think
they kind of just leave it there.
Yeah. The point of view I think they're saying is she is a really great boss. Look how great she is. But she has to be tough sometimes because of the people who are there. And it's like, no.
That's how she rationalizes it too, I think.
Yeah. But I don't think that the film itself is saying that rationalization is wrong.
Yeah, it kind of just leaves it there for you to just kind of interpret one way or the other, I think. I'm not sure on that because
I'm not sure.
Yeah. And what she's doing, I think, is much subtler compared to all the other nominees here, but she does have, again, this allure that's very powerful just when the camera is lingering on her face, when she's hooking up with Jean-Baptiste and saying things like, this doesn't have to happen, but just like giving into it anyway. I think all of that allure is important to the character, especially with how she very passive-aggressively is wielding her power and really just trying to avoid responsibility and covering her tracks and kind of like, again, making excuses for herself, which I find interesting. I just feel like I wish it was explored further, like you're kind of talking about.
Yeah, and I think that with a lesser actress, you wouldn't get that regalness, right? Like you need someone in a role like this that without saying a word, you get how in a very male-dominated time, she's running this plantation, right? Like it normally in this kind of story, obviously not the exact same story, but of the time, it would have been a man who had that job, and it's not like there isn't a man there, right? I mean, I know her father is older, but like you would think that he would be the one running it, and maybe behind the scenes she might, be helping out a bit. But you have to believe that in that time period that people would not just let her run it, but listen to her. And I think a lesser actor wouldn't have conveyed that.
That's true. Yeah. And again, she doesn't have to go to too many theatrics to convey that feeling.
Yeah, no, not at all. Again, it's like there's nothing wrong with her performance. It's a lovely performance. She's a wonderful actor who gives in wonderful performances. It's just unfortunate what the film is.
Yeah. You can only do so much when the film is what it is, unfortunately.
But again, many actors have won Oscars for terrible, I don't want to say terrible, for films that maybe aren't great.
Right.
Or as great as their performance. Live up to the actor.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just a few other moments I wanted to mention is just her expressing her love for Camille, I think, is felt. Her saying something like, loving Camille more than life itself, but she never actually told her. And that look of kind of guilt and regret after Camille has been away for God knows how long. It's not even very clear, but it clearly has been away for a while. Just that feeling of regret, I do think, has a very subtle power to it in her face. And then from there, it's a lot of just, Camille and Jean-Baptiste and their journey. And whenever we check in on Eliane, she's just kind of like expressing concern about the safety of her adopted daughter, which is all well and good. But, I feel like the film kind of like weaves in and out of her perspective in a way that makes it a little bit difficult to fully connect with this character, in addition to her flaws that we've talked about.
Yeah, and like you said, like I think the strongest relationship in the film is the connection between her and her daughter. And listen, there's a lot of stories that nowadays would not be told, and things that I'm sure people who were watching it back then seem to have no problem with this stranger taking a school child and undressing her to clean her. Mm-hmm. It was extremely uncomfortable, that relationship as well. And that's why I'm jokingly saying like, well, it's French, I guess. It's
sure.
Yeah, it's trying to be this sort of epic romance in a way that is neither romantic or epic.
But yeah, I agree. It is trying. And I said, very handsomely mounted. I just wish the substance lived up to the style of it. You know?
Yeah. But so much is going on. Maybe if they had shortened it, maybe there would have been time for those moments.
Better.
Yeah.
Get more focus. Yeah. But I do think at the end, after they've been separated for so long, their final sort of reunion moment is very emotional. And it feels like we're finally seeing Catherine Deneuve's character really express what she's wanted to say to Camille for so long. And it's at this point where Eliane has been taking care of her daughter's son, her saying like that her son's name is Etienne. She says he's a wonderful boy. Like you can really feel the emotion and the grief of being separated for so long between them. So, she has her moments. I think it's just that the film prevents me from fully connecting altogether with what she's doing. So
yeah, it's I think it's one of those films that even though it was lauded as much as it was, will not be probably looked back in the canon of her films.
Yeah, but it did win foreign language film, so it was definitely a well-loved film at the time. Happy that we can say Oscar nominee Catherine Deneuve just for history's sake. Right? But yeah, wish it could have been for better.
I mean, often, with wins, sometimes you forget. I had forgotten recently, or maybe I didn't know that Walter Matthau won his Oscar for The Fortune Cookie.
Yeah. Yep.
I was like, I don't think I ever knew that.
Of all the things. Yep.
But there's I think it's Entertainment Weekly in my scrapbook. Not only does it name, Indochine, one of the best foreign films of the year, it puts Howard's End in that category as well.
So I guess not foreign language film.
Just foreign in general. Foreign film, I should say. Excuse me. I'm so used to saying the phrase foreign language. But that did surprise me because I'm so used to it being in a foreign language category and not a foreign film. But they listed it as a foreign film, which I feel like today we wouldn't put a British film as a foreign film. It's interesting. Anyway.
All right. Shall we get to our next nominee?
Yes.
Okay. Mary McDonnell in Passion Fish. So Mary McDonnell gets her one and only Best Actress nomination here for Passion Fish. She was born in Pennsylvania, and she broke into show business through the stage, both off and on Broadway. And she also started appearing in TV shows through the 80s and a few films, including Matawan, directed by John Sayles. But then she had her true breakout moment with Dances with Wolves, where she played a white woman being raised by Native Americans. Film wins Best Picture. She's nominated for Supporting Actress, and it really helped establish her in Hollywood. And after that point, John Sayles cast her in his next film, Passion Fish, in this prime leading role, which she said she had actually been talking to him about this all those years ago when they worked together, and she was into this idea of playing what he termed to her at first as a bitter woman. So from what I can surmise, he more or less wrote it with her in mind before there was even a script. He was like, do you want to do this? And she's like, sure, I'll play a bitter woman. And here we are. The film, it's about a soap opera actress, May Alice, played by Mary McDonnell, who gets into a car accident that leaves her without feeling in her legs. So she returns to her hometown in Louisiana, where she struggles to get along with her nurse after nurse who keeps getting replaced until this nurse comes along named Chantel, played by Alfre Woodard. She arrives, and the two of them gradually build a kind of friendship as Chantel is attending to her. So let's talk Mary McDonnell. Thoughts on Mary overall and her performance here in Passion Fish?
Well, this is the film when I first discovered Mary McDonnell.
Yes.
I remember really enjoying her in the film and following her career after that I found, her very interesting in this film. And I think also because of the Oscars and my age, this is around the time where I was discovering these sort of smaller films that are just about people and stories and relationships. The film, like many of the films we were talking about, in retrospect, does have some issues, but I think that as a sort of slice of life of people in that area of the world of America, right, at that time, it more feels like a slice of life of just 1992 or 1991 when they probably filmed it, right? And I think that it's kind of lovely. And I also appreciate, too, how we don't see any of her life beforehand. We start in the hospital and we learn about her. And she's not necessarily a character that starting at that point you would like, right? But she does become a person that we do like. And I think that is in the writing, but also in the acting, that she's able to take someone who really is coming across as despicable. As much as I think you have empathy to understand that she has every right to be angry, every right to be angry. And at first I didn't remember. I thought, oh, do we find out that she's lying? That's not how it happened. Was she drunk or something? Like, there's no sort of, surprise of like, oh, I have this addiction or this moral thing that's happening to me. She just was so far removed from who she used to be. And that plus the anger. I just think it's a really lovely performance. Do I think that it's an Oscar-winning performance? Maybe not necessarily. But I do think that it's a lovely performance. And I also appreciate in terms of Oscars that something like this could get seen. And I do wonder if a performance like this now would not get any attention, which is concerning. That's one thing that I love about The Holdovers this season, right? Is that it's a story about real people. It's a story about relationships. It's not just a large scale epic film, which again are fine. It's just a small little story about humans, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. I think also you're very on the money in saying that who knows if this would even be on the radar to be nominated today. Maybe like Independent Spirit Awards would recognize it.
Oh, it would. Yes, it would do really well at the Independent Spirit Awards. Right. Absolutely. What's great about this also is that then it was able to, I mean, I know Dances with Wolves, obviously Oscar-winning film, but this is something where she is the lead. It gets to show her off more. It also has a bit of the sort of, right, which we call Oscar baity, right? She's in a wheelchair. Yeah. She has a disability, quote unquote.
She's playing an actor.
Yeah, like look at her being an actor pretending that, she can't. That she can't walk. I mean, I recently found a picture of Anne Bancroft, and I know it was for the play, but where she practiced being blind, and so she's trying to light a cigarette, and like her eyes are completely like bandaged up. Obviously, we would not do that today. We would give the part to a deserving person who actually is blind, who wouldn't get the opportunity. But I see why they nominated her, but I'm happy that they did, because it's a small performance that I think this film is the reason that we know her today. That's what I'm getting at, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I really like Mary McDonnell. I think my first introduction to her was Battlestar Galactica.
Yes.
And I remember being really just into her performance there, because the way she played that character, Laura Roslin, it wasn't like anything I'd seen before from that kind of character. There's just a very specific energy that is like flinty kind of, but also warm. And it's hard to even describe, but I found her just really fascinating. And I've seen her in other things since. And I've seen Dances with Wolves, where I think she's pretty good. But, this compared to this is just, right, it's very much not. So was very excited to actually see this. This is my first time watching Passion Fish. And what I wasn't prepared for was just how funny she is. Like, she has a really great sense of humor here, an acerbic quality that I really love, this sort of jaded, sarcastic thing, and truly a bitter woman, as we see in the beginning, just like John Sayles pitched her as from the start. And I love how the film also establishes that she's kind of become that. It's not like the accident made her bitter, and now like this is the path to her coming back to her true personality kind of thing. She's kind of an asshole for a lot of the film, which I kind of like. And yes, her edges are softened by the end because of this friendship, but she hasn't totally changed who she is. She's just gotten to a place of kind of acceptance and some satisfaction, and I just think that's a very honest and very realistic kind of approach, especially with these kind of like disability narratives that we were getting in the 80s and 90s, to show this person she has real flaws, but the accident isn't what defined her.
But I would say that what I really love, and again, this is more, I think, in the writing, right, and as opposed to the acting, which is still there, is that I do think there are hints which she does play on when we find out this information, is that when she was growing up there, she wasn't stuck up. It was everyone else who was a bit stuck up about her, which I appreciate. Yeah. So I think in a way she does sort of go back to who she was when she was there. She's still herself, right? She's still, coming from this acting privileged background. But the small hints, particularly one of my favorite scenes is when those friends, so-called friends, come by,
Yes.
and they're like, "Oh, we used to mock this girl who was weird and had a hair that," and she's like, "That was me."
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah, like she, and the fact that when they come, she doesn't want to see them. Like she knows who these women are, because I think at first you think, well, she doesn't want to see them because she doesn't want to be seen this way, but it's because these are terrible people, which is why she left. But I think that's what makes it more of a compelling performance for me as well, is the fact that it isn't just this sort of like, I'm a bitter woman, I had this accident and it made me a better person. I think it's more of it reminds her of who she had become before the accident, and that maybe that wasn't such an interesting person, and she still has that inside of her, which I just think is a little more interesting than just this accident. That's what I'm getting at, right? You're saying, right? This disability sort of narrative of like, I was a terrible person and then I had this accident and now I am a great person. And I don't think that's what the film is doing. And I appreciate that because it could have gone there.
And I also think her chemistry with Alfre Woodard is fantastic, and they really find each other's rhythms and just this kind of comfort in each other. And I'm sad that Alfre couldn't also get a nomination too, because Alfre deserved it.
And also, that was the first time that I saw David Strathairn, and I think that the two of them also have a lovely chemistry. And through that relationship, you also see who she used to be, because often we become our old selves when we're put against people who knew us back then, you know? And I think their performance is also really lovely. And yeah, I love Mary McDonnell.
Absolutely. And I love when we have the arrival of Alfre Woodard's character, Chantal, and she doesn't seem as irritating to her as some of the other nurses did, and you can tell that she's the one that's going to stick, obviously. And we get this interesting moment, I think, of self-awareness when May Alice is in the bathtub, where she's like, what did they tell you about me? Did they tell you I was a bitch? So it's like she's certainly kind of aware of how she is to people, you know, that she's not the friendliest, but she doesn't really even mind it, in a way that she's just going to be who she is, again, at least in the beginning. And Chantal's response being like, you know, she heard that she was a bitch on wheels, basically, is very funny. But also the moment where like Chantal is away and May Alice falls, and just like the frustration and her inability to get back into her chair is pretty raw. Same when Chantal comes back and realizes that she's fallen, but she doesn't want to go to the hospital for x-rays. It's this very like wounded pride kind of moment that serves to sort of equalize things in their dynamic.
Yeah, I think that she, in a way, begins to, obviously, they have a great connection, but also respects that she's taking all of this garbage that she's putting on her. Because I think in a way, it's almost self-sabotage. I think that she wants to push people away and then drink herself into a bottle and die.
And
really.
Watch TV. Right.
Just, I think that she would be absolutely happy to blame everybody else, and then they find her dead one day. Like that seems to be her goal, whether she, you know, articulates that or not. It's not just that she's clinically depressed, which she obviously is. I think she just wants to push people away until there's no one left so that she can die, which is, I don't want to say the word compelling necessarily, but it feels very real, because she's had her whole life everything that was important to her has been taken away from her. How can you not have empathy for that, whether that was a good life or not for her?
Yeah, very good point. There's the moment when Chantal is setting up this answering machine for her is another great moment, I think, for May Alice. I love when she just kind of wheels over and just presses the button, and she's like, May Alice has crawled into a hole to die. If you want to leave a message, forget about it. Just like, you can feel the pain of what she's feeling, but she also is expressing it in this way that's obviously very darkly comedic. Just the sass of that, I think, is very funny. I think she really plays in both the comedic and dramatic
it's
elements
like I said,
so well.
Yeah, and that's, again, performances that I mentioned that I really enjoy because it's true to life. You know, we all have, you know, gallows humor often when something is happening that we just can't we disassociate in a certain way. Some people do it through jokes, some people do it through other activities, but I think that we've all in our life made a joke that was inappropriate because of how we were feeling in the situation. And it also just makes you laugh, right? Because this is a really sad story. So to combine it with sort of humor, and again, humor is, people laugh from recognition, right? We laugh because we recognize that in our own life. We understand, these are not laughs based on, oh, wow, that was really inappropriate, right? It fits in with her personality. It fits in with the story. And a lesser actor who maybe didn't get that sort of balance might not play it in a way that it would land. And I agree with you. I think that her being funny endears us to her in a way, because we totally get like that it's coming from an emotional place of how she's feeling.
Yeah, but we have that counterbalance of the more traditionally dramatic moments, like when we're really getting into the themes of addiction from both of them. And Chantel has poured out all the booze down the sink, and May Alice just erupts at her and tries to get Chantel to go out and get more. And there is this kind of like ferocious quality that Mary McDonnell taps into sometimes. And I've seen it with other roles too, like on Battlestar Galactica, that I find really almost shocking. Just the level of like anger that can like boil up inside of her and just explode out, when up to this point we've seen her as this kind of sarcastic and bitter kind of person. And then in this moment, she's like really at her base level of anger.
Yeah,
so,
I think often women who are petite, that's something that is not expected, right? This sort of idea of, well, they're a small woman, therefore they're weak, and they, or even particularly because of the situation that she's in, right? And I think that moment is very compelling, because all of a sudden you just sort of get all the rage that is inside of her that maybe you weren't necessarily expecting because of how she looks. It's one of my favorite parts in the film, actually. But also what makes it one of my favorite parts in the film is because of the tennis game that's happening between her and Alfre Woodward. Like, again, lesser actor, that scene would not be as strong. You're only as good as the actor that you're playing with, whether they say anything or not, right? And it's the two of them sort of standing up to each other. And you know what? Some people just need to get that rage out, right? There's rage therapy is a thing, right? She's so angry that she needs to get it out. And unfortunately, the person who's probably her only friend at the moment, whether she realizes that's her friend, whether they both realize they're friends, is going to have to take the brunt of it. It's very rare, I think, particularly today, but even back then, to see a story about two women.
Yeah.
And their relationship.
In leading roles. Totally.
Yeah.
And even after Thelma and Louise, it was still rare.
Absolutely. And, and written by a man. I hate to say it, right? Yeah. That decided to make women the center of the story.
Totally. Also, I wanted to just stop down and talk about this incredible monologue that happens when May Alice's co-star from her soap come and visit. Yeah, I know you know what I'm talking about.
I know, I do. And you know what? That actress is married to the main director of Murphy Brown.
Oh, Nancy Met?
Yeah, she's actually in one of the episodes as well. I didn't know that they were married, but we were talking about her with Barnett.
That's cool.
And he goes, that's my wife. But also, I don't know if you realize, but there was a point in time where actors were doing this monologue for auditions.
Really? Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, but it's very interesting because I didn't know that when I originally watched it. It's something that happened as I got older and became a professional actor and saw people do it. So I'd forgotten about this monologue. So it's such an interesting monologue for all the reasons that I know you're about to get into, but a lesser actor, because I have seen lesser actors take this monologue, and it may be because it's out of context, right? They may not realize what is happening and completely miss the point of it, and it doesn't land. It doesn't land at all. To the point of which, as I was watching it, I went, why is this so familiar? Why is this so familiar? It felt like a foreign monologue to me until I Googled it and realized what it was because of the way that it was being interpreted. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's when the actress who's going to replace May Alice in her soap opera comes and just is talking about her commitment to acting, ultimately, and this one line that she had in a film when she was getting into the business, and the line has something to do with like an anal probe and aliens. I feel like this one monologue is such a perfect testament to like the actor's process and how humiliating the business can be at times, but also if you really want it and you really love it, you're going to give it everything you got, even if it's just one line about an anal probe and aliens.
It's really fantastic. And it's everything you said it is, right? It encapsulates in this one moment, and particularly the way that it's filmed, right? Because we're coming in on her.
I think it's one take.
What you have to give to be an actor, how humiliating it is, how much you put into something that in the end is really not considered with any respect, this sort of one line. But also, it's a funny monologue, but you're not laughing at her. You're laughing at the situation, right? Because it's right. Funny. But I really was very taken by this monologue, and also from a character that we've met once, right? And then we never meet again.
It's a one scene wonder performance.
Exactly. Yeah. And someone that she doesn't even have any sort of connection to. And none of our characters, she's brand new, which is, I think, also really interesting. That scene is really great. Some other really great actresses in that as well. Sheila Kelly and
Angela Bassett.
Angela Bassett. I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
Which just shows, really great casting in this film. But I'm mesmerized by this monologue now because, again, in lesser hands, it doesn't work at all. But also just the writing of it, because it could have been done and directed in which we are laughing at this woman, and you're not. And I hope that people who aren't actors, you are saying that, but people maybe not in the industry who follow film, right, can still look at this and see acting with a bit of empathy.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people see it as this, well, you're all famous, you all have a lot of money. I mean, we saw it with the strike, right? People didn't understand that there were maybe blue-collar actors, that there were people who were struggling to pay their rent or their mortgages or to send their kids to school, that it's not just the people in the ivory tower. Not to maybe make this a little bit more epic than it is necessarily, but I think that it's really a nice sort of tribute, honestly, to actors, when it could have been making fun of them.
Yeah. And also when I look at that scene, it could very easily not be there, because it doesn't really have to do really with like May Alice or Chantel and what they're going through, although it kind of does speak to maybe
I think it does
May
to
Alice
her past.
Went through. Yeah.
Yeah. It shows her past.
But you could easily just, have that not have to do with anything. Like I could see a studio executive being like, well, that doesn't really further the plot. But, I think the fact that it is there just deepens the themes of what May Alice has been through.
And I think it also sort of shows her growth and shows us as an audience sort of a window into who she used to be with all three of those women that come to visit her. And I think in a way for her to realize that it's okay she's not in that life anymore. I think she needs to, as a character, have this sort of, and maybe I don't want to use the word catharsis because I think that it's subtler. It's not like this big sort of moment. But I think that in the course of the movie, for me, that moment makes me see that she's okay and resigned to the life that she's living. And I think that that is very important, particularly in a disability narrative, to not leave it where she's okay, she's still a little unhappy, but she's going to deal with the life that she has, that maybe she's actually better off in the life that she has. And it has a dignity to it. And particularly for 92, I think that that's really lovely to show. She's going to be okay. And maybe she's actually better than she was in the life that she lived through them.
Yeah. And she makes that subtle shift through the end. Really, it makes sense where she ends up. This is a very minor thing compared to all the themes we've been talking about, but I feel like she does have a little bit more of a Southern accent as the film goes on and towards the end.
That's also very real.
Which is something that totally happens when you go back home and you just slip back into it, And she does that without it feeling too forced. Like, oh, now suddenly she sounds like a different person. So that's just one other thing I wanted to note.
No, that's a really good point. I did really like that she did that because it was realistic.
Yeah. And so I really, really liked this film and these performances, both her and Alfre Woodard. Again, I wish Alfre was nominated. Maybe it was a category thing. We didn't know if she was lead or supporting. All these politics go into it. But happy that Mary McDonnell got this one lead nomination. Wish we could have gotten more leading performances of this caliber from her in film. But look, she's killing it on TV. So, I'm sure she's not hurting.
No, I mean, television has been a great refuge for wonderful performances from older women.
Right? Yeah. All right. Shall we move on to our next one?
Yes. What's next?
This will be interesting. Okay. Michelle Pfeiffer in Love Field. So Michelle Pfeiffer is in her prime era in this late 80s, early 90s period. She's got 2 Oscar nominations under her belt for Dangerous Liaisons and The Fabulous Baker Boys, which we talked about a few episodes ago in 89. And it's really off to the races for her after that. So following The Fabulous Baker Boys, Michelle actually established her own production company called Via Rosa. And she does things like The Russia House, Frankie and Johnny, and she got very good reviews for those. And then here comes this banner year, 1992, where she not only has Love Field, but as we said, Batman Returns. I've already talked about that performance on an episode of A Woman Robbed, my bonus series. So look to that on Patreon if you want to listen to me break down her performance as Catwoman. But that's a huge cultural shift for her that comes out in the summer. And then Love Field comes just in time for award season in December. It was produced by her production company and it was distributed by Orion Pictures, who are really struggling very hard at this time, to the point that they actually made this movie in 1990, but it wasn't released until December 1992. So, and it was only a 1-week qualifying run, just right in under the wire. But Love Field, it takes place in 1963 and follows a woman named Lorene, played by Michelle, who's a housewife in Dallas, who is obsessed with the Kennedys, and she's horrified in the aftermath of his assassination, and she wishes to go to his funeral. So she gets on a bus where she meets Paul, played by Dennis Haysbert, and his young daughter, and she strikes up a connection with them. But after making a series of horrible mistakes, Paul and his daughter are forced to go on the run, trying to evade capture, while she also just kind of joins them on their journey. Very hard to summarize all the steps that go into that, so I'll just leave it at that for now. Let's talk Michelle Pfeiffer overall and her, let's just say, not as buzzed about or remembered fondly performance in 1992 here.
Yeah, when I think of Oscar-nominated performances from Michelle Pfeiffer, I think of Fabulous Baker Boys. That's where my brain goes. And
Yes.
And if it wasn't for the fact that I was so into the Oscars in 92, I probably would have no idea about the film in general and that she was nominated for it. I think that particularly at that time, obviously she was having a banner year, but if people made a list of their favorite actors, Michelle Pfeiffer would have been on it. She was so important to that particular era. And I think that this performance is trying to honor that, or this nomination, I should say, is trying to honor that.
Yeah.
And it's too bad because, again, like everyone else in this film, it's not like she's doing a terrible job. It's not like she's not a good actor in it. The film itself is extremely dated. And it's interesting, too, looking back because, at that time, I was really obsessed with JFK and the assassination. I was fascinated with it and, who was on the grassy knoll and, all that sort of stuff. And it was very much in, the zeitgeist at the time. And I don't know if people looking back are that interested in it necessarily. I mean, yes, JFK himself, Jackie, Camelot, but I think that not only is the film dated because of the storyline, but I think it's hard to understand if you don't know about that era. Maybe it's just me, and I'd be curious that she's not unique, right? That her reaction to JFK is not unique. Doesn't mean that is not important to the story or that it makes it a lesser performance. But I do wonder if maybe seeing now that not only is the film dated, but people will not understand her motivations and maybe think that she's a little crazy. I don't know. That is just sort of speculation. And I just find it interesting that I watched this and went, oh yeah, that's right. We were like really, really into the Kennedy and the assassination at the time. It feels very much of a boomer story, right?
Yeah.
But I think what necessarily doesn't help is I think we miss most of her arc. I think that, she's this sort of very sort of like wishy-washy, Marilyn-esque in a way.
Ironically, right?
Yeah.
Because she's obsessed with Jackie.
Right? I thought it was an interesting way that they styled her for this as a blonde as opposed to a brunette. I don't know what that's about. I mean, I know that she is a blonde, but she has different blonde hair colors. But
right.
a more interesting story for me, which is why I think it's a bit lacking, and maybe it's in the editing, I don't know, is the fact that we really don't get that she changes until the end, and it's after all this time has passed, and we didn't see any of it.
Right.
She shows up with a new haircut, and she's apparently been taking care of this little girl, and you can tell from the way Michelle is playing it, so kudos to her, that the character has changed. But we didn't see any of that.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention this sort of cliche of the story at the time, which, again, no one at the time would have had a problem with, of this white woman inserting herself into the life of this black man. But then from a female point of view, she sleeps with this stranger. And I was so done with it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember liking it. But again, I was a child. I don't think I quite understood a lot of the stuff that was happening. But it felt like a movie of a different time. And I don't mean like not today. I mean, even from 1992. But her journey, I don't think is a very interesting journey, unfortunately. And that affects, I don't want to say affects her performance because she's doing her best. I love her, but I think that makes it not really an Oscar-winning performance, which is not her fault necessarily, but there's no arc for her, really. We don't see it.
Yeah, it's another one where she can only do so much. And I think if I were being generous, I would call it a very dated movie. I think the politics of it are, again, very simplistic, even for 1992, like you're kind of saying. And it just makes a lot of sense that this was made the year after Driving Miss Daisy. It just makes sense.
Oh, very good point.
Very
excellent point.
Quite a few parallels you could make, right?
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. I think the narrative feels kind of forced to me. Like it's sort of trying to turn what could have been a very small scale kind of drama about turbulent times in America and the different perspectives of these two people, and maybe even have some nuanced discussions about the conflicts within that. But instead it kind of just goes for this like amped up melodrama and makes it into like a crime movie in order to just like raise the stakes. And it just feels to me very at odds, even with how Michelle Pfeiffer and Dennis Haysbert are playing it. They seem like they're trying to find the nuance in this sort of changing relationship between the two of them. But I feel like the foundation just is not strong enough. And the plot just keeps swinging in these wild directions in a way that feels kind of artificial. And I just never buy into the emotional stakes of it. And it's too bad because watching it from the beginning, it's like I was kind of interested in what she was doing. It feels like very like proto Reese Witherspoon almost, like perky, single-minded, also a little pushy, like the Southern Blonde part of it. Like this is fun to see Michelle Pfeiffer in this kind of mode, or like pushing the wheelchair of her neighbor in order to like get her way into the thing.
That's a great scene because it conveys, just how much she loves these people, right? It conveys the sort of, frustration and how much this means to her in a way almost, like a child would. It again, and it makes sense later on why you see like why she is fixating on them, right? Because it's connected to the emotional core that she is mirroring herself onto Jackie because they both lost children. That's actually very interesting. But that scene really gets to me because I feel like in the sort of frenetic energy of her missing them, it conveys to the audience through her performance and through the circumstances, oh, I get how invested she is. And so to have that sort of really great scene that sort of sets it up where you're like, oh, that's great. And then the rest of the film is not that,
right.
I don't want to say subtle, but I'm trying to find the right words for it. The writing unravels in a way. That's the metaphor I'm looking for. It's sort of just, you start off with this great quilt and then you're like, okay, great, this is going to be good. And then it just completely falls off a cliff after that. And it doesn't have the same kind of writing. Almost in a way, I wonder if there was a ghostwriter on this because it feels like two different films.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. I agree. It just feels like we have this really interesting foundation, and then they just kind of like shook the table and they were like, we just got to make a bunch of like plot machinations happen to get to this point of change for her. But as to your point, we don't see that change. But also what you're mentioning about her connection to Jackie, the line that she says, I think, to her husband that I wrote down, actually, she said, "She got me through the baby. I'd be dead right now if it weren't for her." Which kind of reveals that she had this serious thing happen to her own child. And the way she plays it, I like how she doesn't overemphasize it.
Yeah.
Because her connection to Jackie and to the Kennedys is so strong that it relates very personally to her life. And that feeling is still raw. So she wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interest. I could see why, it's so hard for us to know, right, in what stage she agreed to do the film, right? You don't know if she actually had a script or if it was, heavily edited, or they just said, this is the plot. And I think, for a woman at that time who was probably told, like, not just from her husband, from everybody, is get over it. We don't talk about these things in public. You're not supposed to you lost the baby, fine, you move on. We don't talk about these things. And so that's also very interesting, what that does to her. And it manifests itself in this obsession with Jackie, because she can't resolve it. That's interesting. I could see why she might have said yes, but we don't really see any of that. It's just a motivation that we understand.
Yeah. And from there, obviously, we get into what the plot actually is here, which is her talking to Paul, Dennis Haysbert's character, about Kennedy's death. And she has this very like well-meaning white liberal line where she's like, gonna be a hard Thanksgiving. He did a lot for the Negro. And she kind of just like smiles in this way that's, again, very specifically like kind of clueless white woman. And he's got this sort of uneasy smile back to her, which is very perfect. But obviously that's like her saying something like that is like the least of his concerns, because she's just going to get worse from there and make his life pretty miserable. Because after that, the bus is involved in this car crash, which Paul witnesses the sort of lead up to that. And Lorene kind of just absentmindedly says to the police, "Oh, Paul saw the whole thing." And again, tapping into like the cluelessness of this character, because he's like, oh God, now I have to talk to the police, because he also has this backstory that we'll get into. And this is where the film and maybe even the performance kind of started to lose me. And it feels more guided by this like premeditated plot than what she would actually do as a character. Because I think Michelle Pfeiffer is an actress who reflects a certain sharpness and an intelligence. And this character doesn't. So it's hard for me to kind of reconcile that. And of course, Paul is taken into the police station for questioning, and she's looking after his daughter and sees blood on her head and starts to sort of question that. And the girl's suggesting that Paul isn't her real father. So she straight up calls the FBI, and like, you just know that she's way off base with these instincts, doesn't even talk to him about it. So he reveals this whole thing of how actually he is her father, and that he took her from an orphanage after her mother died, but took her discreetly because the orphanage was responsible for like abuse that was happening to her. But now it's too late, because like she called the FBI, so that is leading to them going on the run essentially, and then she ends up joining him kind of out of guilt. I don't know. Either way, this whole thing is just very sweaty. How we kind of set up what the film is going to be.
I think what they were trying to do was to try to parallel her getting the purse, for the neighbor with this, as if like she's just a moral person. This is what she does. But there are two completely different like circumstances and acts. They're not the same.
Right.
There's different stuff behind it. And I felt like that's what they were trying to push, that she's like, oh, it's just like with the purse. And it's like, no, if that's what you're saying, then you don't understand the characters in your film, which I don't think they do. Because, when they have that conversation and he kind of, yeses her about, what JFK did for, his people, quote unquote, like that would be an interesting movie if the two of them have that conversation. Maybe not now, but in 92, for many people, that would be a revelation and that would be new information, right? Although, in a way, really, that would mostly be for a white audience. So there's also that, which this film is. This film is for a white audience.
Very much written for a white audience.
And so that's another reason why it feels so dated and uncomfortable, because it's it's only really doing the film from her point of view, almost like with Indochine.
Yeah.
Whereas it's more interesting if it was from a different point of view, or that the point of view was equal.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the sort of like Green Book driving Miss Daisy part of the film where they're just driving to Pennsylvania and is like sort of, it's making attempts to be funny, and it's just like what an odd pairing the two of them are, and it seems to be kind of like emphasizing her ignorance mostly and her just being kind of a meddler, which she does a fine job with. It just feels like the material's kind of just beneath her ultimately. And she's also saying that she like wants more out of life and that she was sort of bored with her circumstances, which I guess explains why she's taken this opportunity that she messed up in the first place to then go on this adventure with them. But I do love the moment when he does finally put her in her place after she says that basically like they understand each other, that they're kind of the same. And he very firmly says being bored and being black are different. And I'm glad that the film at least gives us that moment, you know, because there's not a lot of that.
But it doesn't expand upon it. It doesn't, it's very surface level. This whole film is very surface level. And every time you think, oh, that's interesting, stay there. Why don't you stay there? It goes off with the rest of the sort of, you know, we're on the run type of thing. And, you know, I am a big fan of the whole, you know, the journey represents the journey of our characters as well as a physical journey from one place to another. I'm a huge sucker for that. But you don't want to do that sort of in place of actual character development and intention, as opposed to just going, well, we got to get to the next part of the plot now. So sorry. That's what it felt like, you know, the train is going and we're going to go to the next stop. There was too much happening. But I think it just comes down to whoever was telling the story probably shouldn't have been telling the story. It wasn't their story to tell.
And again, like not 2 or 3 minutes after he says that comment, he's like comforting her, and then they kiss, which to me just does not make any sense. Like he seems to kind of like her, but it's very unclear why he's still tolerating her. You know, I guess it's that, you know, shared feeling of regret, I guess, about like the mistakes they've made in the past. I don't know why after what she's done that he would want to be that intimate with her. Like it.
That's why it also feels like a very white point of view of like, well, she means well.
Yeah. And so he has to like understand her and comfort her.
Whereas in reality, that's there, you know, just because someone has good intentions doesn't mean that you need to understand in this particular situation, because she really, really messed up his life a lot, other than just being ignorant. And it's not his job to teach her.
No. And she pretty much at one point allows them to go on without her pretty soon after that. And he then insists on her coming with them, which is just, you know that this is going to be a bad idea. And it ends up being exactly that, because then she goes to the motel room in DC that she had with her husband on their honeymoon. And of course, he shows up there because he knows about all this, that this is happening, and wants to kind of intervene. And then he gets violent with her. And I think, you know, like her sort of anguish, I think is pretty well played in that moment when he starts to like manhandle her and stuff. But then Paul sees from the outside what's happening and tries to sort of intervene himself, and it becomes this whole mess. And of course, Paul is the one who's arrested. And sure, I will grant you that this is sadly the realistic end results for all of this, that he would end up being in jail for a year. But the way it's there, again, is so contrived, and I don't think the film earns the emotional beats of that. And I don't think
it doesn't earn any of them. Yeah. And I don't think that's a fault to any of the actors. You know, something also I think interesting about this performance is that I think that when we think of Michelle Pfeiffer, we think of these very strong, opinionated women.
Yeah, fierce.
And very fierce, with a strength to them that ends up being sexy. Whether she's trying to be sexy purposefully, it's just that she draws you in because she has so much confidence. And so it is interesting to see her play a very wispy character, which is very different from Selina Kyle, because it's not a comic book, right? And I love Selina Kyle, don't get me wrong. But I think that does make it worthwhile to watch. I don't think anyone in this category are bad actors. And it is sort of a refreshing thing to sort of see her play this sort of character that lacks confidence, Which is why I think also it's so jarring, because she's so good at playing confidence that then at the end when she has it, you're like, wait, how did that? No, go back. Tell me how you got there. Like, you can just, in her whole performance, you're like, oh, she's changed, because nothing about any of the dialogue tells you the character's changed. And, you know, a performance should not be about a haircut, right?
Right.
Oh, she cut her hair. She's much more mature and stronger now. You know, it very much feels like a male gaze for sure, you know, in that sense of it being a physical transformation as opposed to showing us the transformation. I don't know. It's very disappointing. It had potential, perhaps, maybe. I don't know. It's a very forgettable film, unfortunately, which I loved as a kid. So I had no clue. I think I just liked her. I just liked her, probably. I thought she was awesome.
Yeah. And hard not to. In 1992, how can you not be a fan of Michelle Pfeiffer?
No, she was definitely on my wall.
It's just, yes, I can believe it. But yeah, the ending just doesn't really feel earned to me either. And I think she does a fine job with it. It's just, did we really have to nominate her for this? Probably not.
No. And, you know, it sounds like it was purposely sent out at the end of the season as Oscar bait.
Yeah. And the bait worked. So
it did.
What can we
Apparently
say?
It did.
Yeah. Well, sadly, that is the last time we will get to talk about Michelle Pfeiffer, even though we had this really great brief run of her in the late 80s, early 90s. But where is her comeback vehicle?
I am very, very hopeful. I need her to come back. She is such an amazing actress. And I don't know if it's a combination of, well, I do know, I should say. No one is writing parts for older women. I know that sometimes actors make choices to take a break. I don't know if that's what happened, and then you lose the momentum. But she is just one of those amazing actors that you see in certain things that she's been in recently, which she's great in, and you want to say, oh, I wish that you would do something with more meat. I wish that you would have the career of Annette Bening, who I also adore, who I'm angry about not having an Oscar.
True.
And I don't know if it's a choice. It probably isn't, because that tends to happen to older women, and that makes me very angry, because older characters, I think, are more interesting. They've lived life. It's far more interesting than someone who's 21 and hasn't lived a life. But I digress. So yes, I am being hopeful that she will come back in some capacity and either be nominated or win. So that's my hope for Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, she's like top 5 for me. I want that for her. So
we're going to manifest it.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to our final losing nominee, which is Susan Sarandon for Lorenzo's Oil. So Susan Sarandon at this point is fresh off her second Oscar nomination for Thelma and Louise, which we talked about last week. That really gave a big boost in her career, and she appeared in a few smaller roles like in The Player and Bob Roberts before taking on this very hefty role here in Lorenzo's Oil, which gets her another round of strong reviews and her second consecutive Oscar nomination, third overall. So Lorenzo's Oil is based on a true story. It's telling the story of the Odoni family, Augusto and Michaela Odoni, who found that their young son, Lorenzo, was displaying some odd behavior, and he was ultimately diagnosed with a rare disease. That's acronym is ALD. I can't pronounce the full name because it's very long. But essentially, it's a metabolic issue that causes deterioration in the brain. And so Augusto and Michaela realized that there was no cure and that their son would die within 2 years, and they decided to go about trying to find a cure anyway. And after a long process, they discovered there was a special oil that sort of kind of slowed the progression of the disease, which would then become Lorenzo's Oil, which helped to prolong his life, really. So the film is all about their struggle to find answers and find a cure. Nick Nolte plays Augusto using a very interesting Italian accent. And Susan Sarandon played... Maybe we'll mention it. Susan Sarandon is Michaela. So yeah, let's get into it. This is a heavy, heavy film. Also directed by George Miller, which is a pretty big outlier in his filmography. But what do we think of Susan overall and her performance here in Lorenzo's Oil?
I mean, this is a very Oscar baity role, right?
Oh yes.
It's definitely in a way give my daughter the shot. It is
yeah, it's true.
In a story that we have seen many times before. The doctors won't listen to us. I have the answer. I alone will save my child.
Mm-hmm.
How can you not feel for that, right? She's a mother herself. I think it's a wonderful performance. Susan Sarandon is a wonderful actor. Of all the films, if you take out the political aspects of it, in terms of structure, in terms of the way it's filmed, this film feels the most dated to me in that term. I was surprised. If I didn't know better, I should say, I would be surprised this was 92. And it reminded me, in a sense, of I used to have a podcast on Harrison Ford, and we reviewed The Frisco Kid. And if you just watch The Frisco Kid, it feels like a film from the 60s, let alone the 70s, let alone 1979, which when you look at all the other films that came out that year in comparison, it's shocking. This feels like a film that was in development in like 1984, 1985. And again, I don't know the background about it. And then, by the time that it was perhaps produced, again, I don't know if this is true. This is just I'm saying from feeling of it. It was even out of date for 92. So I have a problem with this film for many reasons, even though, again, loved it at the time, sobbed at the end. And that's not her fault, right? But she plays all the beats. She's emotional. She's caring for her child. She's being a mother, right? Like, this is very sort of female archetypes of many Oscar films, let alone the time. It's not something that I would look at as one of her great performances, but she's not bad in it. There's nothing wrong with what she's doing, but the material is very weak. It's very weak, I think, and that unfortunately puts her at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is powerful work from Susan Sarandon. I think it's a film that's really tough to watch at times, but she does, for me, provide a very strong emotional through line, and I do think she is the best part of the film.
Absolutely.
That I find myself very compelled whenever she is on screen. I think as a role, this could go very wrong if she's just a little bit too hard-nosed, or on the flip side, not forceful enough. But I do think she finds a great sort of middle ground in showing that this woman is totally single-minded in her goal of providing treatment for her son, and how that starts to affect the relationships with her husband and her sister, and even some of the nurses that come around to help Lorenzo. And I think, as we've come to know about Susan, she does have very strong convictions just as a person. And I do think she translates that into this performance really well in showing just how far she's willing to go. She has just lost any sort of self-consciousness or even social graces at times. Like, she is all about this one thing, which is providing for her son. And I do think it is smart the way that she plays it that way, of someone who truly can't have a moment's rest because she's always thinking about her son. And I think it's because she knows that, it's maybe going to be a limited time with him and time is running out, that there is more of an urgency in the way that she speaks and the way she kind of clenches her jaw, and like when the tears that well up when she's speaking. So I think I do really like what she's doing in the film personally. I do respond to it, at least emotionally.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't have cried if I wasn't, because she's the through line, right? She's the
Exactly.
emotional through line of it. If you don't care about her, you don't care about the film. You don't care about Lorenzo. You care about Lorenzo through her. I absolutely agree. And I think that it's hard sometimes to go back and look at the filmography of a wonderful actor that to say, well, yeah, of course she's great, because she's Susan Sarandon. She's great in everything. I can't pinpoint this any different from any of her other performances, right? I mean, obviously, A Dead Man Walking, I just for some reason blanked out of that name, is a wonderful performance. And it's the meat of that. You see why she won the Oscar for that, right? Like, it's that very different from this performance. But it's hard for me to look at this and not just say, well, it's the content really as to probably why she didn't win, because she's doing a wonderful performance, and she is the linchpin of the film. And if it wasn't for her, I could not watch this film, let alone if it's dated or not, right? Like, back then, I loved it. I really was very taken by this film and her journey, because even though it makes it seem like it's the parent's journey, you only really care about Lorenzo and what she's doing because of Susan Sarandon's performance. So in that sense, it's really masterful. I agree.
Yeah, and I think another thing about Susan Sarandon is just the expressiveness of her eyes. Even in those smaller scenes, like her just like when she's not even saying anything, her in the beginning, like at Catholic Mass, and she's just like looking up, tears in her eyes, that kind of thing. She's able to say so much even when she's not saying anything at all.
Yeah, I agree.
She's got those Bette Davis eyes.
Yes, she does. And I think also what's interesting is that she's really playing kind of two different characters, if you think about it, because the person that she is with Lorenzo is very different than she is with her husband and the doctors, right? Like, and her sister. Like, you could even say that those are four different characters, but, you know, sort of to simplify it, I can't speak today. To simplify it, it's sort of two versions of herself, right? And you know, what's interesting in acting is sort of contrast and this sort of fighting against something. That's what's interesting. That's conflict, right? Story is conflict. So to have her have to, you know, deal with her son in a way that she's probably not giving her full self, because if she showed her full self to her son who is in pain and dying, that could hurt him emotionally, right? But also if she becomes too emotional with the doctors, what is that going to say to her argument, right? Particularly as a woman, right? Oh, she's a grieving mother. We're just going to ignore her. And, you know, talking about strength, which you talk about with Michelle Pfeiffer, I mean, the strength that she's giving in this performance isn't just I'm a strong woman. It's all of the things that she's fighting against to not just collapse on the floor in a crying mess.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the scene where the doctor is actually breaking the news towards the beginning to her and her husband that he does have ALD and he only has 2 years to live. I love that, you know, just as a directorial choice, at least in that scene, they don't feel the need to underscore that at all. It just is that sort of like bass note of dread, because he's kind of trusting the actors to sell the emotion, particularly Susan.
Yeah.
And even when the doctor says he's 100% certain of his diagnosis, you can sort of feel her heart shattering in that moment. But again, there's still that like slight sliver of hope in her asking like what exactly the disease is. Are there people out there studying the disease to find a cure? She is just kind of refusing to lay over and accept this fate ultimately. And I think for as maybe emotionally manipulative as the story can be, and the idea of her playing the mother role, like it could be pretty standard on paper, even as a performance, I do think her approach to it is very studied and sensitive, and her feistiness as an actress really comes through in scenes to come as she is fighting so hard for it.
This movie is saved by all of the women in it. Like the casting is really spectacular.
So many character actresses.
So many character actors. I mean, it's great to see Margot Martindale in anything, but even just like that nurse. Oh God, it's just even like the nurse that you talked about, right? Like when that nurse comes up and said, you know, and it's like, oh, Lorenzo, let's go play over here. You know, on her face that something's wrong, right? Like, or when she comes back, you know, in the like, just small things like that. Not necessarily telegraphing. I mean, we all know that this is not going to be a happy story, but like, it's also the surrounding players. And like I said, you know, you are only as good as the actor that you are acting along with, and oftentimes they can make you better. It's very smartly directed. That was something that I really took to, was all of the amazing women in this film that support our lead actor to make the story more believable, and also, you know, help the relationships for the actor and her performance as well is really lovely.
Yeah, definitely. And the scene where they go to this kind of like support group meeting, big meeting room with other parents who have kids with ALD is very interesting for her, because they're kind of like talking about making cookbooks and I guess putting too much emphasis on like the doctors and their efforts rather than talking about the children themselves. I do love when she kind of sasses back at them from the audience when she says, so what you're saying is that our children are in the service of medical science. How foolish of me. I always assumed that medical science was in the service of the sufferers.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very universal story, right? Like you could take this and put it in any situation today and it would still fit.
Yeah, I just think that sort of stubborn edge is so in Susan Sarandon's wheelhouse.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she speaks in a way that other people who may be thinking what she's saying in the audience feel like, oh, that's going to be like my true advocate, you know, which I don't think every actor is able to do, to have that sort of command, you know, and have people be like, oh, yes, I agree with what she's saying.
Yeah. And you have to believe that she gets people to follow her, right?
Exactly.
And
right.
Who wouldn't follow that person with that much conviction?
Yeah, especially because all of these parents, you know, there is a time limit on, you know, what's happened and what their kids have been diagnosed with. So you understand the urgency, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no question. What would you do for your child? Everything. So that I think is really at the core of the film, and it's through her.
And I think even if others around her think that maybe she's either going too far with it or stepping outside the bounds of what's done in these kind of situations, there is that fierceness that is what's needed for the role. I do love the scene where she invites over the leaders of the support group after there's kind of this hope for this special oil that could,
that is a really
again,
great
slow
scene.
the progression of the disease. And she wants the other parents in the support group to know about this. And she is like insistent on letting them know that there's some hope. But the leader couple, they don't feel that it's their right to do that, you know, because it could give them false hope. And the doctors haven't even really tested it fully yet.
Yeah, you understand the point of view of everyone in that scene.
Exactly.
And I think what's interesting is how, you know, her husband is trying to stop her, right, from, you know, like showing the anger that she has, and she's also trying as well, but she's also angry. And then you have Lorenzo in the background. It's a really great scene, and it goes to something, you know, that we spoke about in Passion Fish, right? This idea of like, we just don't see stories today that are just about humans and relationships. You know, there's no real sort of large plot in this. It's just, my son needs help. He's dying, and I need to fight the establishment to find a way to save my son. No other major sort of plot points in that.
Yeah, that's all you need. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do love how she reacts so naturally when her husband does, like, you know, kind of put his arm around her, kind of sort of indicating that she might need to like take it down a notch, basically. That feels very specific, like wife reaction to a husband in that situation. Like that's very realistic, I find.
Yeah, that's
but then,
what I
of course,
really
when he runs out of patience, he starts to run out of patience too, and he just kind of erupts at them. And she just sitting next to him has this look of pride, like, see, like we're aligned, we're on the same page. So it's a very standard role when you look at it on paper that she happens to just do a lot with because of her face and her convictions, her eyes again. And she makes a lot with what could be a little.
Yes,
that's what I would say.
Again, you know, I think that a lesser actor in a film like this would have not made not only a dent necessarily, but wouldn't have got your attention through the film to be invested. So that, it's such an emotional film. And I, as much as, you know, if you just read an article about this story, it would be emotional. But what keeps that thread through this as a film, because it doesn't really have... recently, I heard someone talk about the film Dave, and they talked about that you don't see a lot of films where people are applauding math. And that's kind of the big plot points in this film is you know, books and science and trying to sort of, you know, find the right formula. And how do you make that compelling? And I don't think it's compelling because of the way the film does it. I think it's compelling because we are seeing it through the emotion of these parents, particularly the mother.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's pretty much all I have on Susan for now, unless you have anything.
Susan's great. Love her performances as an actor.
She is.
I bawled my eyes out at the end of this film.
Shall we move on to our winner?
Let's move on to
finally
the winner.
Here.
Yes.
Okay. I know you're excited, so
I'm
let's
very
get
excited.
to it. All right. 2-time Oscar winner Emma Thompson, because she also won for her screenplay for Sense and Sensibility, which we will get to in a few episodes. But Howard's End was a huge international breakthrough for Emma Thompson. But before that, she was born in London. She's the daughter of actors. She went on to become the first female member of the sketch comedy group at her college, where she met Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, and they did some early TV work together. She won a few BAFTA TV awards. She did stage work, and she made a handful of films, including Henry V with her then husband, Kenneth Branagh. But it really didn't feel like she had fully arrived worldwide until Howard's End. And this also is kind of continuing what I've talked about a lot on this series, where the ultimate Best Actress winner really campaigned very hard to be cast in their role that they would ultimately win for, even if they weren't always the first choice, but that their persistence really got them through. She apparently wrote to James Ivory, hoping to be cast in this adaptation, the great E.M. Forster novel, hoping to play Margaret Schlegel, and she got her wish. So Howard's End is a period piece from Merchant Ivory taking place in Edwardian Britain, and it follows the lives of the Schlegel sisters, Margaret, played by Emma, and Helen, played by Helena Bonham Carter. So Margaret is the big sister, very emotionally centered and intelligent. Her sister Helen is a little bit more impulsive, reactive to the class divide that's kind of going unchecked in this country. But for Margaret, she befriends this lonely wife from a rich family, Ruth Wilcox, played by Vanessa Redgrave, who decides to bequeath her beloved country home of Howard's End to Margaret rather than her family, which causes turmoil in the Wilcox family, who burn up her written request, and things become more complicated from there when Ruth's widower, Henry, played by Anthony Hopkins, starts to woo Margaret, and they eventually marry, and further developments happen from there that we'll probably get into. Mm-hmm. But let us first get into Emma Thompson overall. Again, I know that you're a huge fan of hers, so I'd love to know your history with Emma Thompson and your feelings on this performance. Yeah.
So I first became a fan of Emma Thompson from the film Dead Again, 1991. Nice. It is a spectacular noir thriller. I have seen it a million times. I love it. And as you know, Kevin, the audience, I don't think I've mentioned it necessarily, started a huge scrapbook on Emma Thompson. I actually had a scrapbook on Murphy Brown, Bette Midler, and Emma Thompson. It's very strange. Wow. All separate, of course. I did a lot of collage art, you know. Sometimes I just didn't want to ruin it, you know, and I started putting it in albums and things. But it was mostly about the art, I think, of it and photography. What's interesting, I think, about my introduction to Emma Thompson is, you know, in the 90s, right, it was all of that British stuff was like really, really big, all of the sweeping dramas, the Shakespeare, and I did love it. But a lot of people would mistakenly assume, oh, that I was very dry and dramatic, and I was sort of a, you know, a costume drama girly. Not that I didn't love it, but what made me fall in love with Emma Thompson was her interviews. Yes. I loved her in this performance, and then I would see her being interviewed. And particularly, as you mentioned, she did campaign. So I see this film in 91. She's in Howard's End in 92, which of course I saw in the theater. And then she's doing all this press. So I see her do back-to-back press for these films that particularly Dead Again, that I loved her in. And then, of course, you know, the whole romance of her and Kenneth Branagh was like my Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt was all about them. I was like the couple forever. And, you know, we know how that turned out. So,
right.
I thought she was funny. I thought that she was so witty and intelligent. And later on down the line, I've learned that a lot of the things that she believes in, you know, I was like, oh, yes, I think that what you're saying is very intelligent, very smart. But I was drawn to her at the beginning because she was funny. And she just happened to be this great dramatic actress. And I think that that's lost for some people. I think maybe more today, probably because, you know, you see her on award shows and people online, you know, can watch clips and see how funny she is. And so it became about this sort of combination of comedy and drama. And I thought that she was interesting on screen and off screen. And that's what really sort of struck me, because I think that at that age, you sort of go, oh, well, I'm interested in this person, and you kind of get your fandoms. But I only really would stay when I would find their interviews interesting and I wanted to know more about them. And then I would sort of start these scrapbooks, and then I was sort of done. But what's interesting about Howard's End is that I think I was too young for it. I didn't like it when I saw it. It was too slow for me. I think I was pretty smart back then. I was watching a lot of adult fare, but I remember my friend saying, "Oh, wasn't it amazing how he was killed by what he loved, books?" And I didn't get that. And I went, "Oh, yes, that was so fascinating," and like pretended that I understood it.
Totally.
So what I love about revisiting this particular performance is that I really do love this film. And I think I was too young for it at the time. So I thank you for that. So my history with Emma Thompson is really about how I just think she's a cool dude, so to speak, quote unquote.
Right.
And her acting just happens to sort of reflect that. And Sense and Sensibility and Much Ado About Nothing tend to be more my sort of, costume drama loves of Emma Thompson. And they also have wit and are funny. And that combination was always very, very enticing to me. I'm definitely more of an Austen girl than a Foster person. So that's the short end of it. She's just fun.
Yeah. I have a very different history with Emma Thompson where she actually wasn't someone that was even like a childhood favorite of mine. And I truly only got a sense of her through her stuff in like the early mid 2000s, like Harry Potter,
Sure, yeah.
Stranger Than Fiction, Love Actually, of course, Nanny McPhee even, Angels in America, definitely.
Oh, she's fantastic in that, yeah.
For some reason, she wasn't one of those like iconic actresses to me. I fully had no knowledge of her period dramas of this era, so she wasn't as big a deal to me as I now know her to be. And it wasn't till I got older, really, that I came to really appreciate and love Emma Thompson. Whenever I watch her, I think there is this emotional intelligence and a charm that I really respond to. And I think, I guess above all, just an honesty and a feeling like she really just has a really good head on her shoulders, So I feel like having now seen her great 90s work like Howard's End, Remains of the Day, Sense and Sensibility, all this stuff, I've really come to love and respect her, not just as an actress, but as a writer, And with Howard's End, this movie I've talked about, I think, like 3 times now on this show, just in various contexts. It is a great starter pack for what makes Emma Thompson so great. But what I also love about this is that, like, this being an Oscar-themed podcast, watching Howard's End, you're not seeing a lot of obvious moments of acting. She's not transforming. She's not doing a voice or whatever. She doesn't even have all that many monologues. She has 1 or 2 fights, but a lot of the performance, I think, is her keeping a very even keel and just being an all-around, just like friendly person. And I kind of love that the Oscars recognized, even without those obvious markers, just how brilliant she is.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think that that's something that's very at the core of Emma Thompson as an actor is her emotional intelligence. And, going about it as an adult looking at her work, I think that also it's very specific. If you look at her work as an actor, every moment is important in the sense that you see someone living their life. And I think that that was what people recognized in Howard's End, because really you kind of go, oh, well, the crying in front of the mirror, that's the Oscar clip, right?
Sure.
That's the scene that made people probably go, oh, this is a great performance. But I think that it's more than that, because she's living every moment. And sometimes you can look at an Oscar-winning performance or an Oscar-nominated performance or just someone who's a good actor, and they're not living moment to moment. They're sort of living big moment to moment. And you may not sort of realize that until you look at a performance like Emma, where it is subtle, where you see all the different things that are happening. And also on top of that, with this particular performance, it's Edwardian, which is a time when people didn't show their emotions, which is what this movie is about, right? And going back to before, it is much more interesting a performance when you're pushing up against something. I went to the actor studio, and I think a big misunderstanding about the method, many misunderstandings about the method, is that, well, I'm being emotional, and therefore I'm a good actor. I'm crying all over this scene. I'm a good actor. Well, no, that's not what people do in real life. People they don't want to cry. They don't want to be emotional. They don't want to be vulnerable. vulnerability is what makes performances interesting. But you have a time period where people are not allowed to show that. And so you have this really interesting performance as well, not just because it's Emma Thompson, but because you have someone who's pushing up against social norms of how they're supposed to act. Which is, and talking about other performances in the film, one of my absolute favorite moments in this film is when Anthony Hopkins puts his hand up. He's so embarrassed about being emotional. He doesn't want her to see it, as if that's going to make her not realize he's crying. And it's such a beautiful decision as an actor that plays into the period and what someone of that time would do, as well as the thematic themes of, I think, of those characters particularly. And so I think that that's something that drew people's attention, because I think that sometimes, particularly American actors, can be a little showy.
You could say
and
that.
I think that this was at the time surprising. My scrapbook, I was telling you off mic, that I looked back at a lot of this to sort of prepare to see what I had in my scrapbook. And there's a lot of talk about how there's this sort of new British invasion, right? That they hadn't seen since the 60s with so much, British nominations, but also talks about how Americans sort of look at the Brits as being better actors because either the accent or the type of work that they're doing. They also talk about how they easily go between comedy and drama, which is something that at the time was not as prevalent in the United States. I think it's more known now. The idea that Judi Dench did a sitcom, I think, surprised a lot of people. And here you have Emma Thompson, who comes from sketch. She's not even really a classically trained actor like a lot of her, contemporaries. A lot of the articles compare her to Vanessa Redgrave, which I don't agree with. I think that they're comparing her to her because she's in the film with her. Vanessa Redgrave is a lovely actor, but there's sort of I don't want to say sprightliness, but like the fact that Emma Thompson knows what's funny also makes it a really interesting performance, because she's realistically bringing humor into it in a way that maybe isn't laugh out loud humor, but it's what makes her so charming. Not to mention that these are characters who are sort of, very much outside, not just the social circle, but the sort of mores of the time, right? They're dressing very differently. They're talking about being suffragettes and the vote, and politically, they also are very sort of not in tune with society. And it's sort of a long-winded way of saying I love Emma Thompson, but I think that might have been what people took to this performance, in a way that are different from not just the other performances, which are all great, but don't sort of have that sort of societal mores put on top of them.
Very well said. I think that actually speaks to, I've been working my way through Barbra Streisand's doorstopper of a memoir recently.
Yes, I just finished it.
Yes, it's quite an experience. Well, she kind of mentions the idea of like, that is the good stuff when you see someone trying to hold back from crying, in a scene. That is where you get the most interesting stuff. And I think that's exactly what this performance exemplifies here. And it's kind of similar to what I talked about last week with Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs, where for as great as that performance is, she doesn't have too many big obvious moments that make it an Oscar-winning performance, quote unquote, in the traditional sense. And I think that and this performance from Emma Thompson are perfect examples of what great acting can be. They just become these characters and they don't wink to the audience or try to show off what they're doing. It is just full lived-in character work. And I think a great example of that is like when her aunt is asking about like Paul Wilcox, who's engaged very briefly to Helen, and is he from like a good family and good standing? And Margaret is just like, Helen is in love, that's all I need to know. And she just seems genuinely happy and supportive in a way that a sister can be. It's not forced, it's not overly cheery in a weird way. She's just comfortable on screen as this woman, and she performs it in a way that feels like she has filled out all of the details of this woman and studied all of the nuances ahead of time. So now she's just living it on screen, and you don't see any of the seams. There's not a moment in the film where I'm taken out of it and feeling like, oh, there's Emma really going for it here. Like, she's just, you understand how she is reacting in every scene.
Yeah, and I think also, as new as she was at the time, she is kind of a bit of an it girl. She's Henry V which she has a very small part in, but she's my favorite part of that film, sort of is coming in on Branagh being her husband at the time, who directed and starred and, adapted this film. And everyone's comparing him to all the greats and Orson Welles. And, he's kind of this sort of it guy. And he brings along his wife, who used to do musical theater and comedy and has done some drama, and I think that made people go, oh, she's someone we've never heard of in the States. We like shiny things. But also we remember her in that Oscar-nominated film that we all loved that is very important because it's British. And I think that that's part of it also, in a way. I think that they think that they're discovering someone who I remember in college having a friend from the UK, and he was like, oh, well, she's like our Carol Burnett, Lauren. You have to understand, like, that's how we saw her. You see her very different in this country than we see her, because we've, seen her do all this sketch and was on the West End in Me and My Girl, excuse me. I wanted to say another one with girl in the title, Me and My Girl. And I think that might be part of it. I'm not saying she's undeserving, obviously. I think that is sort of the politics of also why, she won.
Yeah, I think they love a kind of, even if they're not new, they love a Star is Born moment.
Yeah.
Especially in Best Actress. But I think you see, like, in her conversations early on with Ruth, how attentive she is to her, how much of an active listener she is, and, like, asking follow-up questions to these things that she says, and seeming very genuine, and inviting her to lunch at the Schlegel's house, and observing that, like, Ruth clearly didn't have a good time. Just, like, her curiosity and her interest. It's these very small details that I'm kind of zeroing in on here, but I feel like it's way easier said than done. But that authenticity that she has is key to her even being bequeathed Howard's End in the first place. So for as thrown off as that Wilcox family is when they read of what Ruth's done after she passed, it's not like we're surprised, because we're like, of course Ruth would give this to this really wonderful woman.
I think also you have to believe that Anthony Hopkins' character falls in love with her also, because it's such a brief courtship. I mean, to the point of which I was a little taken aback that they had one lunch and he proposes to her. Like, I wish that there was like one more scene, just one more scene, even if it was before, his wife passed, where they interacted. It just felt a little rushed. And I know that, it's a very long novel, and I'm sure they had a lot of information to go past. But part of, your belief is the performance. You believe that he would fall in love with this woman who, even though they're mocking her at the table, right, is so charming. But then also what sells that scene is when he does propose on the stairs, and the emotion she's trying to hold in because of how she feels about being asked this, and how much it's going to change her life to be married at that age. Change her life, let alone that they may not have a place to stay. I mean, there's just so much about a woman of that time in that performance, in that moment on the stairs, that then conveys to an audience who maybe may not realize what her position is, then helps the narrative. And that also was a wonderful performance, because if you can help the narrative with sort of emotional currency in the scene that's not over the top necessarily, but feels real, you then get the sense of like, oh, this is really important, because she didn't have time to fall in love with him, to be honest. I believe that she does, but there are other factors in play, and you see that through her performance, particularly in that scene, I think.
Definitely. I definitely pinpointed that as well on this watch. And you see her practicality, I think, and her feeling like, well, pretty soon my siblings and I won't have a house because it's too expensive for us to still live where we are. And this guy is kind of proposing some security. And that's a little bit what is attracting her too. And I think it's actually kind of a selfless act when you think about it.
It is, yeah. But I think also there's that beautiful little moment when she's looking out the window and she sees them coming back from the wedding, and we focus on Anthony Hopkins particularly. There's a life that she's looking at literally from, a window that she can't be a part of. And I think that is also a small little clue to later on as to why she says yes. It's almost like a little girl. And I don't think that Margaret is a little girl at all, but just sort of that idea, because she is a woman who is at a certain point not married and probably not experienced as someone her age now would be, right? To look at that with a sense of like, oh, I want to be part of the dollhouse. And then realizing it's more complicated than that, right? It's all more complicated than that. It's a very interesting story. And it makes me, I've never read the novel. And I wonder if maybe I should read the novel.
Yeah. And I think her agreeing to marry him and sort of uphold certain values because of that in a kind of way bumps up against her sister's values. Like when I think the three of them are together outside and Henry says something to the effect of, well, the poor are poor and that's that.
Yeah.
And Margaret doesn't really, protest or anything, while Helen is outraged by this and takes a much different attitude. But Margaret is just like, I gotta sort of stand by my future husband. You can't expect me to
that's
argue.
what you did back then, right? And it's
Right.
because Margaret understands the consequences of that, right? Like
Yeah.
I do believe, again, that she loves him, but she also understands is that if she goes against him and they don't get married, her whole life would fall apart. And that's why that scene in front of the mirror is so fascinating, because she realizes that. So this is one of the scariest days of her life. And she goes through all of this stuff and she holds it up and she doesn't say anything. And so that when she finally is alone and she sobs in front of that mirror, it's like you feel that. And it's because of the performance through all the rest of the scenes. Because it is a bit shocking, but you also go, yeah, no, I get it. I get why that didn't come out of nowhere, but I didn't realize that she was going through that much emotion until it all comes out.
Yeah, and the context for that, for those who haven't seen it, is
no,
it's fine. it's there's so much to the film anyway that
a lot.
You want to say all of it, but the reveal that Henry's had an affair in the past and is indicating that they had an affair while Ruth was still alive, I think really affects Margaret deeply to realize that her future husband is a cheater, and so she has that good cry about it, but I feel like she also gets to a place of trying to settle that very practically after that, saying
she has
it's all behind us, and you can see it in her eyes that she does have mixed emotions about all of this. It's not like, oh well, all is forgiven, boys will be boys. She makes it very clear through the way that she talks to him that she is hurt, but they're mature and they can move on, even if maybe things are not going to be quite the same after this.
Yeah, and I think it's more too. It's like, she cares for this young man that she's met. He's not a stranger. She does have the same values as her sister, but she's just in a circumstance where she needs to align with her husband. I think that there's a lot about that day that isn't just about the affair that sort of comes through. And a lesser actor, I keep saying the same thing, sorry, you wouldn't sort of get that. And I think that's why people were so sort of drawn to her performance, because there's so much happening while also not a lot happening. Right. It's a really beautiful, detailed performance.
Yeah, there are layers to it, and you might not, if you're not as into the film or you're not looking or like actively leaning in, you might not pick up on it, but yeah, she is doing the work. Yeah. And one of my favorite lines is after Helen is kind of avoiding her and the rest of the family at a certain point, and she's kind of fearing that Helen's gone mad. And one of my favorite lines in the film is when Henry calls Helen mad, and Margaret kind of like brushes up against that, even though she's said that. He's like, oh, well, isn't that what you're kind of saying too? And she says, it's madness when I say it, but not when you say it.
Yeah, you can't say things bad about my sister. I can, not you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very real.
That's very real. And just the way she even expresses that, it's kind of like, it may not sound logical when I'm saying it, but like it makes sense to me emotionally. There's a complexity to the way that she says that I think is so brilliant.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to Margaret, and I think that, I haven't seen anyone else play her. I know that there are other versions of Margaret Schlegel. I love saying that. Schlegel. It's such a great name. Schlegel. But, you could not like her. Mm-hmm. Some of the choices that she makes, you could not like her. But you like her because of the person who's playing her, which is Emma. you really you empathize for her. You really do. And understand. You may not agree, but you understand why she feels she has to make those choices.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the big scenes for her is when she asked permission from Henry to have Helen stay at Howard's End just for the night before she goes back to Germany, and her kind of mounting frustration at him for not just granting her this one bit of grace, you know?
Yeah.
Mostly because, you know, Helen's had an affair and she's pregnant, and like he has his values, but like he's a hypocrite in this situation. And she very pointedly says, "Will you forgive her as you yourself have been forgiven?"
I mean, that whole scene is wonderful. Some of the many beautiful scenes are between her and Anthony Hopkins. Like, you understand why they worked together again in Remains of the Day.
Right.
And I think that more people know Remains of the Day when I bring up their partnership than this film. But I think if you enjoy them in Remains of the Day, you should watch this, because they both really work well off each other, even though in a way you also get the feeling that as much as they do have a chemistry, that there is a wall between them as well, which I think is very hard to do, because if you put a wall between you and another actor, you could possibly give a performance in which you are not connected at all and there's no chemistry. And I think that's very difficult. And it's really sort of amazing to see. You know, it could have been a British cliche in a way, right? I think Eddie Izzard, she has this bit in her act about, you know, drawing room comedies, like, oh, you know, and that can happen, obviously, but it's not just the plot, it's sort of the making those moments real, because you know, you can't do a piece like this and have modern emotional clarity, maybe, or emotional beats. It's just not going to work the same. But this film, in general, you know, I don't know if people realize, but Merchant Ivory were, I would say, one of the biggest costume drama imports from the UK. I mean, if you knew a British film, you probably saw a Merchant Ivory film before you saw anything else. And they do it so well. I mean, even the dialogue, like I've written some plays that take place in the 20s. I know this isn't the 20s, but those would be the children of this generation. So they would have learned their word usage from people of that time. And I recognized so many different sort of slang words and phrases and the way they said things by saying, oh, well, that's how people talked in the 20s a bit. Oh, that's really interesting. And so I think a lot of times these days we'll see a lot of these costume dramas and they ignore that and they sound very modern. And I know it's a hard thing to do because we're much more far off from that time period than we were in 1992. There were people who were still alive who were from that time. It's also based on a book. I'm sure there's some dialogue from the book, but it gives an authenticity to it in a way that doesn't when it's in a modern vernacular as well.
Yeah, this is a very transporting movie, I think, in that way. It really does every detail of it. The production design is incredible. All of the actors. I wish Helena Bonham Carter was nominated too. Not sure which category it would be in, but either way, phenomenal movie. Love this performance. I don't know if you have anything else, but shall we get into the Oscars discussion?
Yes, let's talk about that.
Okay. All right, here we go. So going into the Oscars here, this race, at least on paper, was pretty much signed, sealed, and delivered for Emma Thompson. This astonished me just looking at it. Literally, she won every single award there was to win. And I'm going to list them all for you. Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Drama, BAFTA, New York Film Critics, LA Film Critics, National Board of Review, National Society of Film Critics, Boston Film Critics, Chicago Film Critics, London Film Critics. Clean sweep. And you know, for the rest of them, the scraps, you know, Catherine Deneuve at least won the César Award, which was a few weeks before the Oscars, which makes sense. Mary McDonnell was a Golden Globe nominee. Susan Sarandon was a Golden Globe nominee. She had some other critics nominations too. And Michelle Pfeiffer, Golden Globe nominee, a few critics nominations. But, you know, again, on paper, there didn't seem to be much competition for Emma Thompson here. She kind of sailed right through the win, but what I also read is that there was some rumblings about maybe Susan Sarandon can come in. I think a few columnists were predicting it to be Susan, like Roger Ebert. But,
oh, really?
Yeah, so that was interesting because when you look at the precursors, it's like I don't know about that, but why do we think Emma Thompson was our winner from this group?
I think it's a combination of a really beautiful, nuanced performance and this idea that British actors are better than us, at least at the time. I think that the Oscars often can be sort of political, right? We all know that, and can look at a race from the sense of like, how does it look? You know, I forget who it was now, but one of my favorite things was there was a foreign film director who was like, "Oh, it's a very nice local award." Right? Like we think the Oscars are this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I was like, I knew it was recently. And I kind of love that because it kind of puts us in our place, right? Like, you know, I mean, even the whole EGOT thing, right? It's an American thing. There's no BAFTA in there with an EGOT.
Right.
And so I think that it's a lot of patting ourselves on the back. Again, she's wonderful to be like, look at the Brits. We gave it to a Brit for a costume drama. Isn't that fabulous? But I do find it interesting that they thought there might sort of be an upset. And again, like looking back at it, I mean, I can read one of them if you want, like looking at sort of the coverage of how she is being sort of depicted with this, you know, oh, she's got the intelligence of Catherine Hepburn and the beauty of so-and-so and all of these references to like the next Vanessa Redgrave. They're trying to put her in this box. And how, you know, it's very easy to put someone in that Vanessa Redgrave box by giving them an Oscar, by saying, we anoint you the new queen. I was going to mention someone from the 30s no one would know, so I stopped myself. But you know, that sort of what we think of now as Maggie Smith, right? Which I think is much more aligned. Like that's why it was very surprising to me. I would have compared her more with what people knew of Maggie Smith at the time, because Maggie Smith has a sense of humor. But she brings more of comedy to all of her performances, whether it's dramatic or not, than I would say of Vanessa Redgrave.
Certainly.
But that's also, we're looking at, you know, the breadth of her career. And again, like I think a lot of people at the time didn't understand that she was a comedic actor. I mean, I think an actor is an actor, but like that was her reputation in the UK, was a funny lady. You know, can I ask you, have you seen any of her sketches?
No, I haven't. I was going to look.
I will send you some.
Ran out of time.
They're very out there and very wacky. So it's not just that she was doing like comedy. She was, you know, doing an entire skit on an Austen version of people talking about their first penis that they ever saw.
Oh boy.
Really crazy stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, that's why I think, but I don't know. I was not there.
Yeah. I think with Emma, you know, she does have such a radiance and a warmth that just really enchanted people ultimately. And I don't think we had something like this winning Best Actress in a little bit. Like we had like a Marlee Matlin in Children of a Lesser God, or even going all the way back to Audrey Hepburn and Roman Holiday. Sometimes there is just that actress who emerges with this magnetic, semi-unique screen presence. And maybe it's not a performance that has all the bells and whistles, but you kind of just want to be on their team and be part of anointing them. And I think that is what happened here. It also helps that she's the only person here in a Best Picture nominee from this group, and nothing else even came close.
That's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. I have a question for you, actually, that I just thought of in the moment, which goes back to something that I had said as to what drew me to Emma as a performer, were her interviews. And I know that people talk about this more now, about how, oh, well, so-and-so may not win because they're not necessarily good at the talk show circuit, or they're not good at, you know, being as charming as so-and-so, because you know more about the Oscars than I do as in general. And do you feel that was a thing in the 90s as well, that it could have been how witty she was in interviews, in acceptance speeches, that would also push people to vote for her?
Yes, I do think so. Obviously, things have changed now. We have the internet, and it's just like the nature of all of that, and how people breathlessly talk about the Oscars 24/7, 365 days a year. It's changed and it's kind of accelerated, but you know, I think it helps. There are exceptions, obviously. We have things like, you know, I mean, Catherine Hepburn obviously never even went to the Oscars, and she won 4 times, and they didn't care. Frances McDormand, I think people obviously really love and respect, but she's not going to be that person who's just like kind of delightfully telling stories. She has that kind of acerbic quality, and it's very case dependent, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So
it makes me a little sad, I guess, you know, that you could be the best actor in the world, but people don't find you personable enough to win an award.
Yeah.
But I guess that's, that's also Hollywood, right? Politics everywhere. But
popularity contest.
No, it is, right?
Yeah.
It's too bad.
So, yeah, and also I wanted to mention Gil Cates, the Oscars producer, decided to dub this year the Year of the Woman, and they made a big thing about it because there had been some female politicians at the time that done very well in elections, and they called that the Year of the Woman. So Gil Cates was like, hey, I'm going to do that for the Oscars too. Yeah, but a lot of women in the industry felt like this was kind of a perfunctory move, especially when the roles for women were considered weaker overall this year than in years prior. And even when you look at the Best Picture nominees, like all of them are about men, except for Howard's End. Clint Eastwood and Unforgiven really dominated this year, and it feels to me like Emma Thompson was always just going to sort of be the choice, and the others weren't taken super seriously.
I would also say that he did not come up with that on his own. Because
no, he did not. He stole it.
He stole it, yeah. I mean, 92 is a big year in Murphy Brown because that's the year that Quayle had a conniption over her having a baby out of wedlock. And so that whole year is like, you're the woman, you're the woman. It's, this sort of dubbed thing, which again is, untrue because of a lot of the performances. Not to mention, I'm now blanking, I think if it was 93 or 94 when First Wives Club came out. It might have even been 96, but my brain right now. That movie came out and then they said that it was a fluke, that women's pictures are a fluke. Like, so even when the women were successful, Hollywood would say, oh no, people don't want to see stories about women. That was just a hit for other reasons. So we're not going to make that again. And it's like, but we showed you that it could be successful. Oh, no. That's not what people want. And we still get that today, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I can see why people might have been upset that they were calling it. But I didn't know that. That's really interesting from what I know about 92.
A lot of, people like even Shirley MacLaine, who you mentioned earlier, and Sally Field were kind of like, okay, like this is nice, but is this like it just felt like very hollow kind of thing to do. And especially because if you watch some clips of the ceremony, like they kind of mention certain things here and there, but it's not the tribute that you would hope it would be. But I just wanted to mention that, a little bit of context. Like there was not really a feeling of like, oh, what an incredible year for female roles in film, when what we got in Best Actress is like, was it? I don't know. But anyway, I did just want to share this one other tidbit from Inside Oscar, actually, that I read. So after Emma's win, speaking to her charming interview self, she was backstage doing press, and she made this classic self-deprecating bit where she said, obviously it's just downhill from here on in, so I hope you'll all support me in my headlong descent into oblivion.
Oh, God. I do enjoy her. There's a lot of coverage of everyone asking when she and Kenneth Branagh are going to have children, because that's all you need to ask women. And
that
she
tracks,
says something
sadly.
it does. And one of the great things that they keep quoting her is saying is, well, Ken's rather busy and so tired. I think his sperm may be on crutches.
Oh boy. See, she's so sharp and quick. I love that about her.
She's very sharp.
Did you have any other tidbits from your memory or scrapbook that you wanted to mention before we get into Twitter questions?
I did want to read this thing that I thought was really sort of interesting. Just because it's the only sort of pre-one that I have, and because it was on my wall. Oh, and then this as well too is right afterwards. She was referred to in People magazine as the thinking man's crumpet.
Okay.
And that one made me laugh. That's People. But this was Us Weekly, which used to be, not a tabloid magazine. I think people forget that. It actually had some really interesting People, Entertainment Weekly kind of stuff. But here it is. Okay, so her commanding performance in Howard's End has pre-Oscars betting 33-year-old Emma Thompson is the actress to beat in this year's race, which she points out with wry logic means I'll undoubtedly get beaten. Even if Thompson feels the odds are against her, very little else is. Since she and husband, Irish-born auteur Kenneth Branagh, brought Henry 5 to Hollywood 3 years ago. They've been on a roll. See, this feels like I'm reading something from the 1950s, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
And it really was something that I don't think that I really had sort of taken notice to. Oh, and here it is. They try to quote a line from the movie that she was in, which is the Peter's Friends. There was a line used to describe her friend's character that applies to many of Thompson's other roles, especially her part in Howard's End, which is, quote, "You are a very pretty girl, but you make Mother Teresa look like a hooker. Anyone who can do that deserves to win an Oscar."
Okay.
I don't know if I agree with that, but it was very interesting going back in the way that she is sort of described here. And I don't think that's the one where it says that she's like Katharine Hepburn and someone else. But yeah, the coverage on her is very, very interesting, not even just from a sexist point of view, but just in the sense of like how actors used to be covered. But yeah, and then afterwards, a lot of the articles she talks about she can't get a role.
Go figure.
She doesn't feel that the Oscar helped her at all.
I mean, she did go on to get multiple nominations after this.
Yes,
unfortunately, it ended in 1995, but another one that I wish could get an Oscar comeback because it's been quite a long time now since her last nomination.
Yes, I'm still not over that she didn't get nominated even for Saving Mr. Banks. I really enjoyed that performance a lot.
She got very close for that, but yeah.
Yeah, not the It Girl anymore, I guess.
Okay, let's get to some Twitter questions.
Okay, yay.
Greg Adams said, after 2 years of iconic performances and movies in this category, is this the most forgotten / low-key lineup of the decade?
Of the decade?
I think it's in a race with 94, personally, which was Jessica Lange's win for Blue Sky.
Oh, good point, yeah.
A particularly remembered lineup. I mean, people still watch Little Women, the 94 version, and I guess Nell, but I don't know if that's really held up.
I mean, at the time, Nell was a big deal. I would say that Nell is definitely very forgotten, although not by... Jodie Foster said that her kids made fun of her about it, so... in the recent interview. So not forgotten by her children. But yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the 90s have performances where the actors are magnificent, but they're unforgettable roles maybe. And this seems to encompass that. Yeah.
I mean, I don't see people really talking about most of these films other than maybe Howard's End. Maybe that's just people I associate with talk about Howard's End, but
I mean, Howard's End is the superior film, but I would say that more people I know talk about Remains of the Day.
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I just think from this year, there's not really anything else that people watch very much.
No,
even Lorenzo's Oil. Like, I don't know. So that's too bad. But Film and Whiskey Podcast, similar question. Taken as a whole, is this the least seen group of films in a Best Actress lineup in the last 30 or 40 years? I know that numbers like IMDb ratings skew heavily to more recent movies, but this group has an astonishingly low number of ratings.
I mean, it's just a lot of sort of forgotten films. I mean, they also talk about, though, the Oscars are very quickly forgotten anyway. You ask someone 3 months later what won Best Picture and they don't remember, whereas at the time, right, it's lauded and, pushed up and that's all you're thinking about. Yeah, it's too bad,
Yeah.
Particularly for someone like Mary McDonnell, where that was probably what she considers a pinnacle of her career, as she should. That being nominated for an Oscar goes in the obituary.
Yeah, I think this, again, 94 seems like it hasn't really held up or watched as much. I would also throw in something like 2005 as another year where, yes, we had like Pride and Prejudice, we had Walk the Line, but like, are people in 2024 really watching like Mrs. Henderson Presents or Transamerica or North Country? Not really.
I mean, the other reasons for that as well. But at the beginning of every decade, even with 91, there's always a transition, which is, I think, a conversation that is happening for many years, which is that the Academy gets old. And so therefore they will gravitate towards older films. And you see things like in the 70s, right, trying to get in younger blood into the Academy. And the trying to do something like that similarly, where you try to cut people off who haven't been working for a while, or something to that effect. So they do try, but it always seems to be a little too late from when they figure that out, you know. And I think we're kind of in a transition right now as well, where there's the old guard versus sort of the new guard and what they consider. Like, here's a great example. I was talking with my mother, and she said, there are no good movies anymore. And I said, no, there are great films. They're just not the films that you like. There's just not a variety of films for you right now based on what you have seen and the knowledge that you know. And that also goes back to because there aren't a lot of films about just real people. And my mother doesn't like action movies. Like, that's, you know, also a very different story. But I think that when you have someone who is a little bit older, I don't want to be ageist because, as I mentioned, I love stories from older actors and older characters. But I think that sometimes when you have someone who isn't familiar with the changes in film, will then have a more dated approach to what they consider.
Let's see. Chauncey Tellez said, how big was Emma Thompson's margin of victory? I would say probably sizable.
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure she won outright. I'm sure it wasn't a plurality by any means. I think, she was kind of like the choice. So,
God, wouldn't it be terrible if they ever released that stuff? Oh my God.
I would love it. I would love it. Just for my own purposes. I would be so
it would be interesting. I would feel horrible for the actors.
Yeah, to know you got like 2 votes.
Right? Yeah. Oh.
Anyway, Fritz said, Emma is so fantastic, but it's not the kind of showy role that usually wins. Would she have won without her critics sweep?
I don't think so, no.
No?
But what is the options? Like, I looked at some of the other options for nominees. There really aren't any.
I think it's hard to compare because every year is different, but
yeah.
Like we had Michelle Pfeiffer sweeping all the critics awards for The Fabulous Baker Boys, and she lost to Jessica Tandy, so it doesn't always work. I think Emma's movie being so popular overall really gave her a boost. Maybe the competition was a little on the weaker end, but I think in some years she would have won. I think there are scenarios where she would have lost. Hi Girls, Hi Louise said, Glenn Close, sitting behind Emma at the ceremony, looked absolutely delighted during Emma's winning moment. Recast each of them in a screen role of the other that you feel they would most ideally suit.
Oh, okay. Dangerous Liaisons, right? Like, I would.
Oh, that would be fun.
I think that would have been really interesting. I can't see Emma. Well, she was great as the villain in the Cruella de Vil. I could see her as Cruella de Vil, but also it would be a different version of that character. And Glenn is so amazing in that.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to say, actually.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to mention, like, she was in Cruella. Why not have her as Cruella de Vil, even in the 90s? I think that would be really fun, even if it would be quite different. I think that would be cool.
Yeah, but Emma, who would I see Glenn Close in? That's a really good question. Dead Again feels like her kind of film of the same age as Emma, right? Like, I would put her, playing 2 different roles.
She had just done Reversal of Fortune, so that would be, I could see it. I went with an Angels in America.
Oh, yeah, that's a great choice.
I just think it would be,
that's a great choice.
I think it would be very fun to have Glenn Close, like, with the wings and being like, greetings, prophet. I could just see her sort of bellowing that sort of thing. She's a great theatrical actress, so.
No, she is. Mm-hmm. She did recently play Tina Fey in a Super Bowl commercial, so we know she has range.
As I saw. Yes, she has the range. Okay. Chels said, our great speech deliverer has entered the race. Name a few Emma Thompson performances you wish you could talk about on this show. Yeah, there are many.
You should go first with this one because mine is lengthy.
Yeah, well, Saving Mr. Banks, which again she got very close for.
Yeah.
Good Luck to You, Leo Grand a few years ago is excellent.
Oh, it's a lovely film. Oh, I love that.
I also think like her TV movie Wit, because obviously it wasn't Oscar eligible, but
that is she worked so well with Mike Nichols. Like, they definitely had a real sort of, I think, bond in the sense that when he worked with Meryl Streep, and I wish that they had done more films together.
Yeah, so those would be my top 2 or 3 that I would love to have talked about, and maybe I still will in a different context once I run out of Best Actress lineups to talk about.
Yes. I mean, I feel like I've already sort of spoken about the films that I love, Sense and Sensibility, Much Ado About Nothing.
Right.
I'm always forcing people to see Dead Again because I think it's something that's sort of been lost in her filmography because it was so early, but also it's just a thriller, and people don't really do thrillers in that sort of 90s way anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, there might be other reasons why it's sort of forgotten. The children's act, I think, is a really interesting performance. It is something I saw later on. I watched it online. I think it sort of fell through the cracks. It feels much like a play. It's definitely about, I think, human interactions as well. Like it's not a huge plot necessarily. It's a lot about sort of internal emotions and relationships. And that really, took my attention a lot. And I don't think Stranger Than Fiction is also wonderful. Now, Junior, I would talk about in a completely different context. And Impromptu. I think that, I know she's got a small part in Impromptu, but she's so funny in it that I think that people don't talk about it as much.
Yeah,
I mean, I talk about anything Emma Thompson was in.
Yeah. Let's see. The Possibility of Wood said, how is it possible to watch Howard's End and not give Helena Bonham Carter also a nomination? Maybe category confusion may have played into that, perhaps. But yes, I agree. It's a great turn from her.
I feel like at that time, and I may be wrong because I haven't seen that many of her films, that she played very similar characters, like...
Yeah, she'd done A Room with a View. Yeah. Exactly,
yeah, where the character is a very tempestuous youth, right, from what I remember.
Yeah.
So there could be that. She's also not a shiny new thing anymore, necessarily, whereas Emma is.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I'm not as dazzled by her in that time period. I think that she's done more interesting stuff recently, actually. Not that I don't like it, but like in comparison, like what she did on The Crown, I thought was really great.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I wonder if they just didn't appreciate her back then like they should have.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Greg Crameen said, Emma Thompson won an Oscar for acting and writing. Barbra Streisand won an Oscar for acting and for best song. Are there any other actresses who have 2 Oscars, one for acting and the other for something other than acting?
Oh, other than acting. Well, producing, right?
Yes. Frances McDormand just did it a few years ago with Nomadland. She got the double for actress and best picture. So
yeah, I feel like that's a little more common. I think Emma's the only one to win for writing and acting, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see if that streak is broken or that record is broken at any point.
I hope it is.
Would be nice.
There's some really wonderful, I mean, of course, nowadays, they push you to, as an actor, to do everything. So I'm surprised that there hasn't been more. Yes, exactly. You must be a multi-hyphenate. And then they're all surprised during the strike why everyone was fine. They're like, what do you mean? Oh, you taught us to do 5 things. We have 5 other jobs. It's like, we're fine. Yeah. So we'll be back when you give us a fair money. I got other jobs.
I feel you.
Yeah.
Okay. Christoph, Ayrton O'Brien, and Owen Daly all asked basically the same question, which is, how is this Catherine Deneuve's only Oscar nomination? And specifically, why is it for Indochine?
I mean, we talked about that. I mean, do you think it's white guilt? I mean, I don't know. Like, it just feels like one of those nominations for either how we feel about the film as a society, right? Or wow, I can't believe that you haven't gotten it yet. This film is getting a lot of attention. We might as well give it to you. I mean, I
think it's
the latter, I also feel
personally.
Like that, as we get further into the Oscars, and again, you as the expert will probably correct me or not, is there seems to be more of an emphasis on career performances for Oscars, right? Like, you don't have as many like Cary Grants, people who you're just like, wow, I can't believe that person doesn't have one eventually. People realizing their mistakes or going, wow, I think this person, well, no, I should take that back. I was going to say, we think this person's going to die because that's Elizabeth Taylor. So I should take that back. I love Elizabeth Taylor, but that's why she won Butterfield 8. We all know that. Doesn't take away from her being a wonderful actress, right? But there does tend to be more of a, I think, in a modern era of, oh no, we forgot to give you an Oscar.
What have we done? Yeah.
What have we done? So maybe they thought that would do it. And I do wonder if in a different kind of film, because of her career, that she could have, this is all thinking in the moment, because we are kind of already asked this question, right? Maybe she could have beat Emma if it was a different kind of film.
If the material was a little more, I don't know, baitier, I suppose, even though she does get nominated for it, but more obvious perhaps as a performance.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just a matter of the right role lining up at the right time and the right film.
Absolutely,
And I think this film was loved enough to win foreign language film, and she got great reviews for it. Even if I didn't personally respond super strongly to the performance, I can see why, especially like longtime fans of hers would be compelled to be like, oh, this is our shot. And it's like a kind of cool choice, sort of like Isabelle Huppert for Elle. So
yeah. And it was, I think, a lot harder for foreign films to break through back then.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you were Catherine Deneuve of all people, than it is now. It's, accessibility, all that.
Yeah. Yep. And Greg Cremine said, are there any other Catherine Deneuve performances you think she should have been nominated for? Certainly Repulsion, which was probably never going to happen, but
I've never seen that one. I've only really seen the umbrellas of which I can't pronounce as a dyslexic. Cherbourg. I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing myself. Cherbourg. Thank you. I've only seen that.
Yeah, certainly one of those that were in her prime. I think she should have gotten in for. Belle de Jour is another one, of course. Joey Gentili said, is Catherine Deneuve in the right category, or is Lynn Da Pram the actual lead? Sorry, Lynn Da Pham. I think she is.
I think she's
get the
lead.
argument. Yeah. Because, we do follow her daughter in the sort of middle part of the film, but it still feels to me like it's Catherine Deneuve's story, for better and for worse, obviously.
And not just because it's her point of view, right? She's the lead of the film. We start with her.
And we end with her.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's a mistake. But that's just me.
Jeremy Kaplan said, though Mary McDonnell went on to become a beloved TV actress in shows like Battlestar Galactica and Major Crimes, her career as a major film actress was relatively brief. Why do you think it wasn't longer?
Well, how old was she when she was nominated for this film? Like, again,
I actually don't know.
I'm saying that as I try to Google it. I mean, Sharon Stone is also, I know she wasn't nominated this year, but she's sort of a great example of she finally hit her prime, but then she was over 40 and no one wanted to put her in anything anymore, right? So
and Mary was 40. I just found
there you
out.
go. That's what I was getting at. I thought I didn't want to say she was 40 unless I could confirm that. But so my guess, and maybe this is the theme of this episode, it's how women of a certain age are treated in Hollywood. There is all an idea that if you're over the age of 27, you are over the hill in Hollywood. And that has been something that has been said for...
And you start playing mothers, right?
Yes. It's the old line from First Wives Club to bring that up, right?
Right.
But I feel like that's it. She should have a better career than before she went to television. And that's why a lot of older actresses at a certain point gravitated toward television. I mean, look at Damages, right? Like Glenn Close is one of the first real sort of big name actors to sort of come to television, is because that's where the roles are, because they were writing for them. Not to mention, I think it was probably smart, whether it was a choice or not, to say, oh, well, I can get this big name actor who now maybe I can get for a smaller price, and it's going to, prestige and lift up my television series. That also would be smart. I don't know why every filmmaker isn't writing a movie with a lead who's 65 and get these amazing actors who aren't working anymore, and then people will see their film. They will.
Yeah. I think Hollywood just didn't know what to do with her. Ultimately, it's not like she is that glamorous star and others in her type are maybe a little bit bigger names. I think she probably did just find more opportunity in TV, which, again, continuing to thrive in. There's nothing wrong with sticking to TV.
Nothing wrong with it all, particularly now.
Right. And so I'm not worried about Mary McDonnell. Yes, It would be nice to have her in film again, but she seems like she's doing very well for herself. So
I think she is, yeah.
Yeah. Declan Cashin said, did Alfre Woodard miss out here because of category confusion?
Yeah, probably.
Because she had gotten precursor nominations in supporting, even though she's kind of a co-lead in Passion Fish.
Yeah. I mean, I think some people might consider her supporting because, the idea of the point of view, and that, she's the lead. I'm also a big fan of strategy, to be honest. Like, I mean, I guess on one hand, it could be category confusion, but I do think sometimes it's smart to put yourself in supporting if you feel that there is a better chance of winning in that category. I have no problem with that. So it's hard to know, right, what the politics were at the time. I'm trying to think of who was in supporting that year. But also,
that was Marissa Tomei winning.
That was Marissa Tomei. Okay, thank you.
We had
but I meant
British.
against. Who was against her? I know Vanessa Redgrave was, but I couldn't off the top of my head who was against Tomei. But
Judy Davis for Husbands and Wives, Joan Plowright for Enchanted April, Miranda Richardson in Damage.
That's right.
And Vanessa Redgrave. All the British dames.
All the Brits. It really
Marissa
was
Tomei.
a British invasion. Yep. I also do wonder if a lot of these actors who were nominated are nominated because of the name recognition, right? Not the films itself, but because we have established we don't think that they're that memorable. And I don't know how well known Alfre Woodward was at the time. I mean, no, she wasn't a nobody, but like I don't know if that was a name.
She had been nominated for Cross Creek in the 80s.
Okay.
But that was a while ago.
Never mind. I take it back. I've never heard of Cross Creek. Wow. Okay.
Most people haven't.
Okay, I feel bad because I was like, I know I don't know as much about the Oscars as like a lot of people listening, but I do know a lot. So I was a little like taken aback that I didn't know that. But she's someone, I told someone the films that I was watching when I said that I was going to be on this podcast, particularly because my letterbox is looking odd at the moment. And and when I mentioned who was in that movie, they were like, oh God, Alfre Woodward, like, have they done anything recently? And I was like, yeah, tons of stuff. And I like read off the IMDb and they're like, oh, I don't know any of this stuff. And I was like, but you're right. Like there hasn't sort of been anything like big. And this was an actor who in the 90s who we all loved and was a name recognition, I think later in the 90s, but that's just me. So, I don't know. I mean, listen, there's a whole conversation to be had about, the way that Black women have been treated by the Oscars, let alone, which we've talked about at the beginning, right, with Whoopi Goldberg. So there could be a number of reasons. It's a small film. I don't know. Maybe they didn't put money behind it. They did that back then, right? They put money behind certain people and not other people.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, right?
I do think maybe some unconscious bias, like you're saying, against Black actresses. Like Angela Bassett is literally the only Black actress to even be nominated in Best Actress for the entire decade. So the chances of her getting into lead for a somewhat subtle performance, I think, sadly wasn't likely, and supporting was more likely for her. And she maybe kind of fell in between the cracks of being like, well, she's too big for supporting, but also she's not as big enough for lead. So it's like, one of those things. I don't know. Christoph said, should Alfre Woodward be here as well? And who would you take out for her? Or should she belong in supporting? I would love to put her here. I think she does a lot with a mostly quiet role. I don't think she belongs in supporting, even if, it would have made strategic sense to campaign her there. I do think it's a two-hander. If one of them was a male actor, they would have been campaigned in Best Actor. Right, so yeah. That's what I think.
Who would you take out, do you think?
Definitely Michelle Pfeiffer.
That's what I was like, Michelle Pfeiffer or Catherine Deneuve, even though Catherine Deneuve. But
I'm not going to deny Catherine Deneuve at least one nomination in her career. So.
That's right. That's why I was like, I feel like it's Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah. Kenneth Israel said, don't you think the downgrade of Alfre Woodward to the supporting category is kind of disrespectful when she's a clear co-lead of the film? Yes.
I'm loving this love for Alfre Woodward. This is great.
I know. And dare I say, even better than co-star Mary McDonnell.
Ooh.
That's a take. Yeah, I mean, I know, again, the film does start with Mary, and it is largely about her, but, like, Alfre has multiple scenes throughout the movie where
she has a
Mary
whole plot
isn't even
line.
on screen.
She has, like, a whole thing with the romance, and, like, it feels like both their movie.
John T. said, Enchanted April and Passion Fish both pushed hard for lead supporting nominations and only got one each. Which collective pair was better? Miranda Richardson and Joan Plowright for Enchanted April, or Mary McDonnell and Alfre Woodward for Passion Fish? I would say pretty easily Passion Fish.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but this is always a hard discussion for me because I was so into the British actors in 1992. I saw Enchanted April. I love Joan Plowright because of Avalon. I mean, I know she has a prestigious career, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, listen, do we have to pit actors against each other, says the woman on the Oscar podcast.
Where do you think you are?
Yes. How dare I say that? Yeah, it's two totally different kind of performances.
No, it's true.
Two different films. Now, and this makes me want to go back and see Enchanted April. I'll probably not like it. I'll be like, what was I thinking? There's so many films that I realize because, I think when you're a kid, you just, you have nothing to do in the 90s but play video games or go to the movies. Mm-hmm. I saw so many films in the 90s that I have forgotten about until I am reminded of them. Anyway, I digress. Yes.
Yeah. Casey Chapman said, I am one of the rare people who loves Love Field and would have even nominated Dennis Haysbert for it. Do you know the background of how Michelle landed the nomination for this role? Well, I already talked about the one-week qualifying run in December because the studio thought, oh, there's an opening here. Maybe we can get into this weak field. So yeah, we kind of already went into that. Matt Stillman said Love Field apparently grossed just over $1 million US box office during its brief theatrical run. Was Frances Fisher behind Pfeiffer's nomination? A To Leslie reference here.
That's very clever.
Yeah, I think you may be onto something, Matt. No, I think Michelle, she was very popular at this time. Working with incredibly baity material.
Extremely popular. And her performance, as you mentioned in Fabulous Baker Brothers, is a Baker Boys. Sorry, Fabulous Baker Boys. That's a tongue twister I can't say. I do know about film, everybody. I actually know. I've seen a film before. The Fabulous Baker Boys is that she was getting so much traction, like so much attention for that film. It's one of the first memories that I have of the Oscars is people talking about that film because I was too old to see it. So I didn't see it till I was much older. I was too young to see it, excuse me. And I think that people kind of forget just how like high people were on her, let alone that, Catwoman was a very, very sought after part. Right. Many, many actresses did humiliating things that they still can't live up to try to get that part.
Sure.
So yeah, I would say she was just extremely popular and for every reason, extremely talented. The camera loves her, can sing atop a ladder. It's for my Grease 2 fans.
Sure. Yeah. Tico said, would you agree that there's a typo here and Michelle Pfeiffer's 92 nomination is for a movie called Batman Returns?
Yes.
If only. Yeah.
Yes. Selena.
Moving on. Yes. David Pusak said, in the scenario where we take away Michelle Pfeiffer's nomination for this in exchange for her Catwoman in supporting, who would replace her in the leading category? And who would she replace in the supporting lineup, assuming she isn't placed in lead anyways? First of all, she was campaigned in lead for Batman Returns.
Oh, she was? Interesting.
Yes.
Good for them. So, that's smart.
Yeah, but... a strong supporting nomination, I would be fine with that too. Her versus Marissa Tomei would be like quite a matchup there. But I think if Michelle Pfeiffer isn't here, I think probably Miranda Richardson for Enchanted April takes her place.
Yeah, I think so.
She won a Golden Globe.
Yeah, and that year was like very popular for her. I feel she got a lot of attention that year. Yeah, no, I feel like that was a very big year for her, and I think that she was on people's radar for a number of films. That's a really good choice because I hadn't thought about that because I was looking at the lists of like Golden Globe nominations to kind of get a sense, and I mean the outlier is Sharon Stone, but I just don't see that being an Oscar nominated performance. It makes sense that it's a Golden Globe performance, like I get, but I couldn't really put my finger. And I looked at a list of films. I couldn't put my finger on who else would replace any of those people that year.
Yeah,
it's just not that. It's not the year of the woman.
Contrary to
Gil.
what the producers think.
Yes.
Yeah. The ghost of Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty, said, what does Michelle have to do to get back in the running? She hasn't been nominated in my lifetime.
People need to write roles for her.
Yeah, it is kind of that simple. I mean, I think like French Exit is something that maybe should have happened for her, but people are mixed on that movie.
That's a good point.
I think if she turns in another super dynamic performance in a movie that is Oscar friendly, I think she has a shot to still get back in. She is still popular, right?
Yeah. No, I think she is very popular. I think there are a lot of people who really like her performance. And I think a lot of people right now, because of the MCU, are reliving or revisiting some of her performances that either they haven't seen or they haven't seen in a while.
Yeah.
And, I keep sort of joking about, people need to write more things for older women. I think really what I should go back to is that producers and companies and Hollywood in general needs to back these pictures with money. You can write as much as you want. We're still in the same problem that we had in the 90s, is that producers say that there are no stories for women. And when there are no stories for women, then no stories for women are being produced. And if there are no stories for women who are being produced, then there are no roles for Michelle Pfeiffer. Unless she wants to, do it all on her own. Yeah.
Jimmy said, which 3-time Oscar loser is more likely to be nominated again, or dare I ask, even win? Michelle Pfeiffer or Sigourney Weaver?
Oh, I feel like right now it's Sigourney, but they're both in the same place, to be honest. I mean, except for...
I think I've said this before. I think Sigourney Weaver could pull off a kind of Jamie Lee Curtis supporting win.
Absolutely.
I think that's still in the cards for her.
But I feel like in the sense of where their status is among recognition with people and the films that they've done that have gotten any sort of success, except for the MCU, which I'm not going to count because that's nothing to do with Michelle Pfeiffer.
That's a different kind of thing.
It's a whole different thing. But the last film that Sigourney Weaver did that I can think of, I don't even remember the name of it. It was with Kevin Kline, right? Who I love. And I was like, I'm going to see that film.
The Good House?
The Good House, thank you. And I was like, I love them. They're a great pairing. I'm going to see that. Love the Ice Storm, love Dave. And then I realized I have not seen it yet. So that's, very, very telling.
Have you seen Avatar: The Way of Water, where she's in motion capture?
No, I've never seen any of the Avatar movies. I respect anyone who enjoys them. I have no interest in seeing any of them.
Well, that's kind of what she's been busy doing, too.
That's true. I forgot about that. That's been going on for a number of years, hasn't it?
Yeah, off and on. Yep.
Hey, you gotta pay your rent. It's fine. This is terrible. No, it's not for me. I'm very big about the Amy Poehler thing. Good for her, not for me. Right? If this is what you enjoy, it's great. It's just not something I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is from Instagram from Humphrey Fogart, who said, Michelle Pfeiffer is one of my all-time favorite actresses, and I wish she had been recognized by the Academy, but not for this role. What later-in-life role do you think would bring her back to the Oscars? I'm not really sure how to answer that other than to say what I mentioned earlier and what we've been talking about. She needs to get a great part and be in a respected film. She was really good in this great short-lived miniseries, The First Lady, as Betty Ford.
Yes, I actually really liked her in that. I was sad that they canceled that show. I thought that it was such a great example of roles for older women. Mm-hmm. If they had continued that into another season.
Yeah, so I think if she gets something like that in film, playing a real person, I think that could be something.
Well, the Oscars love a biopic, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it.
Because that's the way to pronounce it.
Thank you. I know that it's controversial, but I agree
no arguments from me.
Thank you. I'm glad that we're on the same page.
Yes. So, look, worked for Annette Bening for Naiad, so let's do Michelle Pfeiffer next.
Right? Oh, God.
Joey Gentili said, Susan was a woman robbed. Why do you feel that on her third nomination, she still couldn't clinch a win here? This role is classic Oscar bait.
It is classic Oscar bait. She probably would have won if Emma wasn't in it.
Yeah.
I mean, probably, it would have been one of those films that we looked back on and we're like, oh, really? She's great in it, but this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard to say in retrospect, right? Because what she won for is great. That's a film that you love to have on your resume as the film that won you the Oscar.
Definitely. I'm sure she's thrilled with that. I just think Emma Thompson was the star of the moment, and she just kind of outshined Susan, unfortunately. And that's just how it is sometimes. I don't think it was a malicious thing against Susan that she lost. So,
and listen, you know, I don't know if people realize, but Howard's End is, and getting all that clout and winning the Oscar and getting all that attention is why Emma Thompson is not just a writer, because she was asked to write Sense and Sensibility, and I think has implied that probably would have been her path, that she would have not sort of transitioned out of acting. I mean, I may be wrong, but this is the implication that I get, and become a writer, because she wasn't really a big name actor. She was just a sort of a jobber at the time.
Yeah.
But she said, okay, I'll write it, but I just have to do this one film, Howard's End. And that changed her life, right? So, if it wasn't for that film, we might not have Emma Thompson, actor-writer.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Sliding doors. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Owen Daly said, of the women who haven't won before, who do you wish was the winner the most? I just think in general, like, who do you want to be an Oscar winner of this group? Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yeah, Michelle Pfeiffer. Because, I mean, Susan already it would have been Susan, but she already has one. And I'm a big proponent of sharing the wealth.
Yeah. Andrew, we're going to get to a few snub questions here. Andrew Carden said, who do you think was closest among these to a nomination? Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act, Gina Davis in A League of Their Own, or Meryl Streep in Death Becomes Her? Also, who makes your personal top 5?
This is hard because, as mentioned, comedy gets ignored.
Yes.
I also think that, like, if it was today, Meryl Streep would be nominated. I think that back then, people didn't quite understand that performance in her.
That's true.
Because if you look at, like, She-Devil, she was panned in that. And it's almost a very similar, like, over-the-top performance. And I don't know if it's because people were confused at seeing Meryl Streep do that. Kind of like when Harrison Ford makes jokes, people don't get them because they don't understand why he's making a joke. And it's like, Harrison Ford is funny. He's hilarious. You're just not expecting him to be funny, and therefore it's not landing on you. I don't know. Is it like her best comedic performance? I mean, it's Devil Wears Prada, but, she's doing all the work for the tone of that film. And I feel like it's a film that is much more respected now than it was then. So I think it's a hard question to answer because back then, no. Now, yes. She puts in that performance now, probably. But also it's a comedy, and comedy gets ignored.
Pretty broad comedy, too.
Yeah, very broad.
Same with Sister Act.
Maybe Gina Davis? I mean, Gina Davis.
Gina, of those, is the likeliest one.
It's a period piece. She's, she's doing the dubbing, but it's not her. But, like, she's going across, like, decades. I love that film, but I don't think that it's about her performance, though. That's the thing to me. She's great in it, but it doesn't feel like an Oscar-nominated performance to me. I was surprised that she was nominated for a Golden Globe, actually. But there's nothing wrong with her performance. I love that film. Everyone in it is great. Everyone is doing their job, but it's not The Accidental Tourist. Or even Thelma and Louise.
No.
So, I couldn't find anyone that I would go, oh, definitely that person. So it's hard with those three. I know those are the Golden Globes, right? That's the musical comedy Golden Globes. That's why the suggestion is there. What was the third one?
Oh, Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act.
I mean, Ghost is a better performance. We all love Sister Act. Whoopi Goldberg can do no wrong. I love her. Give her all the Oscars.
That is like a full star performance from her that I love and cherish.
Yeah, and a performance that was not written for her. It was written for Bette Midler. So, like, I don't know. It doesn't feel even for a comedic performance that it would have passed the Oscar test, even though will be a performance that probably will be remembered more than many of the other films and actors nominated for Oscars.
Correct. Absolutely. So Greg Cramen, Andy Bayless, Juan Carlos Ojano, Casey Chapman, they all kind of want to talk about Sharon Stone, Whoopi, Gina, Meryl, kind of just asking if we would nominate them. We kind of already talked about it. For Sharon, I think Sharon, did get the Golden Globe nomination in drama. Ironically, Catherine Deneuve replaces her in the Oscar lineup, basically. Would we nominate? I would absolutely nominate Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct. I think she knows exactly the tone of that movie and totally is like the chaotic bisexual of my dreams. So she is incredible.
I mean, that's fair. That is something that a lot of actors don't get, right? Like if you don't get the tone, it doesn't matter how good you are.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, even though she'd been sort of batting around the industry for a while, it almost feels like a star. Well, it is a star-making performance, but an it girl performance for someone who's been around for a very long time. I mean, I love Irreconcilable Differences. I think she's hilarious in it. I haven't seen it in a while, so maybe I'm not the best judge of this. I think it doesn't feel like the kind of film that the Oscars cared about at the time. I think that's what's changing my mind. So if we're talking about plausibility or like what I want to happen,
those are two different things. Yeah, definitely. Yes. A few more here. Christopher Perkins said, in an alternate universe where The Bodyguard received rave reviews, do we see buzz for Whitney Houston? A megawatt debut and a huge sweeping romantic box office smash sounds at least like a Golden Globes contender. No? Definitely Golden Globes contender for sure.
Yeah.
I could also see it being like the classic like Oscar snub that people are outraged about because they were snobby. If the performance in the film were up to par,
Yeah. I love Whitney Houston. We all love Whitney Houston, but I think that sometimes people confuse an amazing musical theater performance. Not that I'm saying this is musical theater, but someone who is a great singer and can act while they're singing with the rest of the movie. And I'll leave it at that.
One more question from Joey Gentili is a recasting question. Recast these 90s Oscar talents and Karen Black in the roles above. Juliette Lewis, Meryl Streep, Deborah Winger, Gloria Stewart, and Karen Black.
Okay, I don't know a lot about Karen Black's work. I'm familiar, obviously, but I can't say that I can, off the top of my head, speak to her filmography. I mean, I guess Juliette Lewis in Passion Fish?
That's what I said. I think now Juliette Lewis could do Passion Fish and be very fun and interesting.
And then I'm so sorry. What are the other choices? It's a lot of people.
Deborah Winger, who I think is absolutely Lorenzo's oil from these.
Yeah.
She's got that grit.
And then people would like give the press would be like, "Oh, now she's playing the mother part in the terms of endearment
you're
thing."
right.
Yeah, they would like throw that in.
Meryl Streep, I am going to say Indochine and performed fully in French.
Yes. With her Jersey accent.
Yep.
I'm joking. I know Meryl Streep can do accents. She said the thing that I'm from Jersey, and what I love about Meryl Streep, other than her being like amazing, is that she says that she thinks that all her accents sound like a girl from Jersey. And I always like to joke about that because it just shows you that even like the best actress in the world thinks that they are not good, right? Like,
yeah,
she doesn't sound like she's from Jersey. Her accents are great, but whatever. Indochine. Yeah, absolutely.
Karen Black, I'll put in Love Field because she has like a chaotic energy that could make that maybe work, and we can make it more of a comedy and do other things with that. And then I guess Gloria Stewart by default, when she was younger, I'm putting in Howard's End because I don't have any other options for her.
Oh, I didn't think that we were changing their ages, but yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
There's not much I can do about it.
Yeah. That was...
Yeah. Okay, let's get to our final segment where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Lauren, who do you think it was?
I don't know. I think it's Susan Sarandon probably. But it's so it's really hard. I feel like other episodes of your podcast have been really more obvious than this.
Right?
And I thought at first it was because I was biased, but I don't think anymore going through all of these films. Do we talk about politics of it? Do we say, well, the runner-up is Catherine Deneuve because it's Catherine Deneuve and they should give her an Oscar for her body of work, just like Al Pacino? I don't know. I wonder if in the politics of it, she is the runner-up, but in the acting part of it is Susan Sarandon. But I'd also love to give an Oscar to Mary McDonnell. I don't know what to say. It's not very, cut and dry.
I ultimately do agree with what you said, which is that I think it was Susan Sarandon, and I think it's because she was building a bit of a narrative at this moment that would culminate with Dead Man Walking. Mm-hmm. And I think the role is incredibly Oscar baity, even though I feel like roles like that tend to win more in supporting, maybe like the supportive mom kind of thing. I just think of these, she had the clearest like emotional arc that more people would attach themselves onto than the other three.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But like you said, maybe Catherine Deneuve just on like, we're just going to give Catherine Deneuve an Oscar could very well have happened as well. So I'd put her maybe third. But yeah. So who would be your winner from this group? Who would you have voted for?
I mean, I would have voted for Emma Thompson.
Shocking.
I know. Like,
it's just the formality I have to ask.
No, it's okay. No, it's all right. I just know everyone listening is going, we know the answer, Lauren. We know. You're a little biased.
You've laid it out. Yeah. You've got your scrapbook.
I have two scrapbooks
material
from my
evidence.
younger years to prove that I might be a fan.
Yes. And you know what? I actually do agree with you. I think Emma Thompson would also get my vote. I think she exemplifies what great acting can be in this role and is totally lived in this character. And kudos to the Academy. This is 3 years in a row where I agree with their choices. Kathy Bates, Jodie Foster, Emma Thompson. Great start to the decade.
Yeah, I think the 90s, may have been slim for women on one point, but when they were great, they were great.
They were great.
And
yep.
a lot of the winners for this decade are people that you look back on and you just go, yeah, well, that's spectacular. Of course they have an Oscar.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, Lauren, thank you so much for going on this journey with me, going back to 1992. This was so fun hearing all of your thoughts.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, tell people where they could find more of you and your work on the internet and otherwise.
Sure. You can follow me on Instagram and formerly known as Twitter. I'm also on Blue Sky at Lauren Milberger. My website is laurenmilberger.com. I have a podcast, FYI, the Murphy Brown Podcast, where we go through episodes of Murphy Brown and then also connect it to things happening in the 90s and how they connect to today, as well as the acting and the comedy. We've interviewed many of the writers, including one of the nurses from Passion Fish and the librarian from Lorenzo's Oil. So it's a little bit of a connection there. Have been on my podcast. I also used to have a podcast on Harrison Ford where I went through all of his filmography. It's called The Fordcast. You can also check out my writing. I've written on pop culture, comedians for different outlets, Collider, Vulture, things like that. Please engage with me about what you thought of Emma Thompson's performance. I will probably like to talk about that.
Yes.
But yeah, check me out. Would love to see everybody.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. You could find me at Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The podcast is at Oscar Runner Up. Instagram at And the Runner Up is rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerupis, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And next week, we'll be breaking down the Best Actress lineup of 1993, where the nominees were Angela Bassett in What's Love Got to Do with It, Stockard Channing in 6 Degrees of Separation, Holly Hunter in The Piano, Emma Thompson in The Remains of the Day, and Deborah Winger in Shadowlands, with the winner being Holly Hunter. So with that, thanks again, Lauren.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.